The winter wind howled through the ancient pines like a wounded animal. Nathaniel Blackwood moved silently across the snow-covered forest floor, his weathered face barely visible beneath the fur-lined hood of his parka. 20 years in these woods had taught him how to become part of the landscape, how to disappear into the shadows between trees. At 58, his body carried the scars of war and wilderness, but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. The fresh tracks in the snow concerned him, not hunters from Silverpine. He knew all the local men who ventured this far into the Adirondack wilderness. These prints belonged to strangers, heavy boots moving with purpose toward the heart of his territory, toward the sacred place. Nate adjusted the rifle slung across his back and continued following the trail. The full moon illuminated the forest with an ethereal blue glow, turning the snow-covered landscape into something from another world. He paused, crouching to examine a discarded cigarette butt. Store-bought, expensive brand. Another sign these weren't locals. A soft sound to his right made him freeze. A large gray wolf emerged from the shadows, its amber eyes fixed on him. Others would have reached for their weapon, but Nate simply nodded in greeting. "Evening, old friend," he whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "You feel it too, don't you? Something's not right." The wolf's gaze seemed to hold intelligence beyond that of a normal animal. After 20 years living alongside these creatures, Nate had developed a connection he couldn't fully explain. He didn't speak their language, not exactly, but he understood their intentions, their warnings, just as they seemed to understand his. The wolf turned, moving silently through the trees, pausing once to look back. An invitation. Nate followed without hesitation. The animal was leading him toward the strangers, taking a route that would allow them to observe unseen. Within minutes, the flicker of a campfire became visible through the trees. Nate dropped to a crouch, the wolf melting into the shadows beside him. Voices carried on the night air. 5 men gathered around the flames, military-grade equipment piled nearby. Not hunters. Something else entirely. "The location has to be within a 5-mile radius of this position," one man said, pointing to a topographic map spread on a portable table. His expensive down jacket and commanding tone marked him as the leader. "The energy signatures are strongest here." "We've been searching these woods for 3 days, Mr. Kincaid," another complained. "There's nothing but trees and more damn trees. And wolves. Too many wolves." The leader, Kincaid, looked up sharply. "The wolves are precisely why we're here. Haven't you wondered why this specific pack has remained in this exact territory for generations? Why they exhibit unusual behavior patterns? They're protecting something." Nate inched closer, careful to stay downwind. The gray wolf remained at his side, utterly silent. "Tomorrow we'll deploy the sonic devices," Kincaid continued. "They'll disrupt any animal within a 5-mile radius. Drive them out or drive them mad. Either way, they won't be able to interfere with our operation." One of the younger men pulled something from a metal case, a bullet that gleamed strangely in the firelight. "And if the disruption doesn't work?" Kincaid took the bullet, examining it with something like reverence. "Then we'll use these. Silver composite with a core of rare earth elements, specifically designed to interfere with natural energy fields. One shot will kill any living thing, but more importantly, it severs their connection to the earth itself." The wolf beside Nate tensed, a nearly inaudible growl vibrating in its throat. He placed a calming hand on the animal's neck, feeling the same anger. These men weren't just hunters. They were something far worse. A twig snapped beneath Nate's boot as he shifted his weight. The sound, though slight, carried in the winter silence. One of the men jerked upright, reaching for his weapon. "There's someone out there," he hissed, flicking on a tactical flashlight that cut through the darkness like a knife. Nate remained perfectly still as the beam passed just above his position. The wolf had already disappeared, understanding the danger instantly. 20 years of survival instincts kept Nate from panicking, from running. Movement meant death. Stillness meant life. "Probably just another wolf," Kincaid said dismissively. "This forest is crawling with them. Tomorrow they won't be a problem anymore." The men eventually returned to their planning, but Nate had heard enough. These strangers represented North Star Resources, a corporation that had been buying up land around Silver Pine for months. Their interest wasn't logging or mining, it was something specific to this forest, something connected to the wolves, connected to the sacred place only Nate and the local indigenous elders knew about. He retreated silently, putting distance between himself and the camp before rising to his full height. The gray wolf reappeared at his side, joined now by 2 others from the pack. Their presence confirmed the gravity of the threat. In 20 years, he'd never seen more than one approach him at a time. "I know," Nate murmured to them. "They're coming for the heart of the forest, but we won't let them find it." The wolves moved ahead, guiding him through the moonlit forest toward his cabin. Nate followed, his mind racing. He needed to warn Margaret Clearwater, the only other human who truly understood what was at stake. The corporation had brought specialized weapons, the silver bullets that had made the wolves react with such fear. Whatever North Star was hunting, they came prepared for something beyond normal wildlife. Morning sunlight filtered through the pines, casting dappled shadows across the face of Diana Sullivan as she drove her aging Subaru along the winding road into Silver Pine. The small town emerged from the forest like an afterthought, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to apologize for intruding on the wilderness. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as a strange sense of familiarity washed over her. She'd never been here before, yet something about the mountains surrounding the valley resonated within her, like returning to a childhood home. At 34, Diana had built a respectable career as an ecological researcher at Cornell University, specializing in predator-prey relationships and forest ecosystems. This sabbatical year, studying the unique wolf population of the Adirondacks, was her chance to establish herself as a leading voice in conservation. At least that's what she told her colleagues. She wouldn't dare tell them about the dreams that had haunted her since childhood, dreams of running through these specific mountains alongside wolves, of ancient stones humming with power beneath a full moon. Dreams so vivid they sometimes felt more real than her waking life. Dreams that had intensified over the past year, pulling her toward this remote corner of the Northeast like a lodestone. The town's main street consisted of a handful of businesses, a general store, a diner, a bar, and a small motel with a flickering vacancy sign. Diana parked outside the motel, stretching her legs after the long drive from Ithaca. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, crisp and clean, in a way city air never was. Again, that unsettling sense of homecoming washed over her. "You must be the wolf lady," a voice called out. An elderly man emerged from the motel office, wiping his hands on a faded flannel shirt. "Got your reservation right here. Don't get many researchers this time of year." "Dr. Diana Sullivan," she confirmed, offering her hand. "And yes, I'm here to study the local wolf population. Their territorial stability is quite remarkable." The old man's friendly expression cooled slightly. "Wolves are wolves, Dr. Sullivan. Nothing special about 'em except they're good at killing livestock and scaring folks. Been here longer than they should have, if you ask me." Diana recognized the sentiment. Rural communities often viewed predators as threats rather than vital components of healthy ecosystems. Her work wasn't just scientific, it was diplomatic, convincing locals that coexistence was possible. "Actually, this pack shows unusual stability and hunting patterns," she explained, keeping her tone conversational rather than professorial. "They've maintained the same territory for generations without expanding, which is nearly unprecedented. I'm hoping to understand why." The man grunted, handing her a room key. "Room 4, end of the building. Town meeting tonight at the community hall, if you want to introduce yourself. Fair warning, though, North Star's sending representatives. Folks are more interested in jobs than wolves these days." "North Star?" Diana asked, the name unfamiliar. "Resource company. Been buying up land parcels around town, promising development jobs. Good thing, too, town's been dying since the sawmill closed." Diana thanked him and carried her bags to her room, a dated but clean space with pine furniture and a quilt that had seen better days. She unpacked quickly, setting up her laptop on the small desk. The window overlooked the forest edge, mountains rising beyond like sentinels. Those mountains called to her in a way she couldn't articulate, an instinctive pull she'd dismissed as academic enthusiasm. The town meeting would be a perfect opportunity to introduce herself and gauge local sentiments toward her research. She changed into slightly more formal attire, khaki pants and a green sweater that brought out the emerald in her eyes. Her red hair, usually tied back in a practical ponytail, she left loose around her shoulders. First impressions mattered in small communities. The community hall occupied what appeared to be a converted church, its steeple still reaching toward the darkening sky. Inside, folding chairs had been arranged in rows, already half filled with locals. Diana took a seat near the back, observing. These people lived in the shadow of the forest she'd come to study. Their cooperation would be invaluable. Conversations hushed as a well-dressed man in his 60s entered, followed by two younger men carrying presentation materials. The expensive cut of his charcoal suit and authoritative bearing set him apart from the flannel-clad townspeople. This had to be the North Star representative. The town mayor, a portly man with a nervous smile, called the meeting to order. Folks, as promised, we have Mr. Harrison Kincaid, CEO of North Star Resources, here to discuss potential opportunities for Silver Pine. Kincaid took the podium with practiced ease. His silver hair and tanned face gave him the appearance of a distinguished statesman rather than a corporate executive. When he smiled, the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you for welcoming me into your beautiful community," he began, his voice resonant and confident. "I won't waste your time with corporate jargon. I'm here because Silver Pine sits on the edge of something extraordinary, a unique geological and biological environment with tremendous potential." He gestured to one of his assistants, who unfurled a large map of the region. Areas had been highlighted in different colors, with North Star's existing holdings marked in red. Over the past 6 months, we've acquired several parcels of land surrounding Silver Pine. Our initial surveys indicate significant resources that could provide jobs and economic revitalization for decades to come. The presentation continued with impressive graphics showing employment projections, infrastructure improvements, and community investments. Diana watched the faces of the townspeople transform from skepticism to hope. She understood their position. Small towns across America were struggling to survive as traditional industries declined. North Star was offering a lifeline. Kincaid concluded with a masterful appeal to local pride. "We don't want to change Silver Pine's character. We want to ensure its future, working hand in hand with the community to develop these resources responsibly." The applause was enthusiastic, but not universal. Diana noticed an elderly woman in the front row who remained seated, her weathered hands folded in her lap. As the mayor opened the floor for questions, the woman stood slowly, aided by a carved wooden cane. "Harrison Kincaid," she said, her voice carrying surprising strength. "I remember when your father came to these mountains with similar promises. The Clearwater people have long memories." A tension fell over the room. Kincaid's smile remained fixed, but something flashed behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or annoyance. "Ms. Clearwater," he acknowledged. "My father's generation approached resource development differently. Times have changed, as have our methods." "The forest hasn't changed," the woman replied. "It still has a spirit. It still has guardians. Some things aren't meant to be developed or exploited." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Diana leaned forward, intrigued by the exchange. The woman, Ms. Clearwater, was clearly indigenous, likely from one of the native tribes with historical ties to the region. Her opposition seemed based on cultural or spiritual concerns rather than environmental ones. "I respect indigenous perspectives," Kincaid responded smoothly, "which is why we've included cultural preservation funds in our community package. We can honor the past while building the future." The exchange continued, with other townspeople asking questions about specific jobs, environmental impacts, and timelines. Diana listened attentively, mentally cataloging the information. North Star's interest in the region complicated her research. Corporate presence often meant restricted access and altered ecosystems. When the meeting concluded, Diana approached the podium to introduce herself to the mayor. Before she could reach him, she found herself face to face with Harrison Kincaid. "Dr. Sullivan," he said, surprising her with his knowledge of her name. "I was informed we had a wolf researcher joining our little community. Cornell University, correct?" Diana nodded, shaking his offered hand. His grip was firm, his palm surprisingly calloused for an executive. "That's right. I'm studying the unusual territorial behavior of the local pack." "Fascinating creatures, wolves," Kincaid replied, studying her with unsettling intensity. "Misunderstood, too. People see only the teeth and claws, not the complex social structures and ecological benefits. Your research could help change those perceptions." "That's the hope," Diana agreed, wondering how a resource company CEO had developed such nuanced views on wolf conservation. "Though I admit, I'm curious about how North Star's operations might impact the local ecosystem." Kincaid smiled, the expression calculating rather than warm. "We should discuss that over coffee sometime. North Star prides itself on environmental stewardship. Perhaps we could even facilitate your research. Our land acquisitions include significant portions of the wolves' territory." Before Diana could respond, an aide approached, whispering something urgent in Kincaid's ear. His expression hardened momentarily before returning to its practiced pleasantness. "Excuse me, Dr. Sullivan. Business calls. I look forward to continuing our conversation soon." With a nod, he departed, leaving Diana with the distinct impression she'd just been assessed rather than merely greeted. As the crowd dispersed, Diana noticed the elderly indigenous woman watching her from across the room. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition perhaps, though Diana was certain they'd never met. The woman beckoned with a slight motion of her hand. Diana crossed the room, drawn by curiosity and that same inexplicable sense of familiarity that had haunted her since arriving in Silverpine. "You hear it, don't you?" the woman asked without preamble, her dark eyes searching Diana's face. "The forest. It speaks to some people, always has." Diana hesitated, unsure how to respond to such an unusual greeting. "I'm Diana Sullivan. I'm researching the local wolf population." "Margaret Clearwater," the woman replied. "And you didn't answer my question. The forest called you here. That's why you came." A chill ran down Diana's spine. Her dreams, her inexplicable draw to this specific forest, these were things she'd never discussed with anyone. Scientific reputation was fragile. Admitting to following what amounted to instinct or intuition was professional suicide. "I'm here because the wolf pack shows unusual territorial stability," Diana explained, falling back on academic language like armor. "Their behavior patterns suggest—" Margaret Clearwater made a dismissive gesture. "Save the university talk for Kincaid and his kind. They won't find what they're looking for without someone like you. That's why they're bringing in the special equipment. That's why they're tracking the wolves." Diana frowned. "What equipment? What are they looking for?" Instead of answering, Margaret reached into a beaded bag at her side and withdrew something that caught the light. "Your mother had red hair, too. Not as bright as yours, but the same fire in it." "My mother?" Diana asked, genuinely confused now. "You knew my mother?" Margaret placed the object in Diana's palm, a silver pendant on a leather cord. The pendant was shaped like a wolf, intricately detailed, with tiny emeralds for eyes. It seemed ancient, the silver tarnished in places, yet the craftsmanship was exquisite. "She wore this when she came to the forest 30 years ago, said it had been in your family for generations, said it helped her hear the trees and stones. Now it returns to you, when the forest needs its voice most." Diana stared at this pendant, a memory surfacing from childhood. Her mother wearing this exact necklace, telling bedtime stories about magical forests and wolves that spoke to humans, stories Diana had loved but gradually dismissed as fantasy as she embraced science and academia. "This was my mother's?" she whispered. "But she died when I was 12. How did you get this?" "She gave it to me for safekeeping before she went into the deep forest. Said if anything happened to her, I should keep it until her daughter came looking for answers." Margaret's eyes held immense sadness. She knew the risks. The forest reveals its secrets at a price. Diana clutched the pendant, her academic skepticism warring with the undeniable authenticity of the artifact and the emotion it evoked. Her mother had never returned from an expedition in the Adirondacks. The official report cited a hiking accident. Her body never recovered. Could there be more to the story? What happened to her? Diana asked, her voice barely audible. The same thing that happens to anyone who threatens Kincaid's obsession, Margaret replied cryptically. Be careful, Diana Sullivan. Wear the pendant. Listen when the forest speaks. And trust no one from North Star, especially Harrison Kincaid. He spent 40 years searching for what your mother found in just one season. Before Diana could press for clarification, the town mayor approached, ending their conversation. Margaret nodded once more to Diana before departing, her cane tapping rhythmically on the wooden floor. Diana left the community hall with more questions than answers, the silver pendant heavy in her pocket. The rational part of her mind dismissed Margaret's warnings as the superstitions of an elderly woman, perhaps even early dementia. Yet something deeper, more instinctive, recognized truth in the cryptic words. She walked to Silver Pine's only bar, needing time to process before returning to her motel room. The establishment was exactly what she expected. Wood paneling, mounted animal heads, and the scent of decades-old beer soaked into the floorboards. A few locals glanced up as she entered, their gazes curious but not unwelcoming. Diana ordered a local beer and took a seat in a corner booth, removing the pendant from her pocket. Under the dim bar lights, the silver wolf seemed almost alive, its emerald eyes catching the light. It was undeniably the one from her childhood memories of sitting on her mother's lap while she told stories of forests with ancient magic and wolves that protected sacred places. She was so engrossed in examining the pendant that she nearly missed the conversation at the bar. Kincaid's men were up near Old Man Blackwood's territory again, one man said to the bartender, setting up some kind of equipment on the ridge. Blackwood'll run 'em off, the bartender replied with a chuckle. Man's been defending that patch of forest like it's his kingdom for 20 years. North Star doesn't know what they're dealing with. This is different, the first man insisted. Military-grade stuff. Fences, sensors. One of my cousins is on their security team, says they're looking for something specific up there, something valuable, and they're bringing in specialists to handle the wolf problem. Diana sipped her beer slowly, listening without appearing to eavesdrop. The name Blackwood was new to her research, potentially a local recluse living in the wolves' territory. Such individuals often had valuable observational knowledge about local wildlife. Wolf problem's been solved before, another patron commented. Remember the culling in '98? This isn't about culling. The first man lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent Diana from hearing. My cousin says they've got some kind of sound devices, supposed to drive the wolves crazy, make them leave the territory, and special ammunition too, not normal hunting rounds. The conversation shifted to local sports, but Diana had heard enough to concern her. Sound devices designed to affect wolf behavior would devastate not just the pack she came to study, but the entire forest ecosystem. And who was this Blackwood person? A potential ally, perhaps? She finished her beer and returned to the motel, the silver pendant now hanging around her neck. As she prepared for bed, Diana found herself standing at the window, gazing toward the dark forest beyond the town limits. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants, their silhouettes black against the star-filled sky. For a brief, disconcerting moment, she thought she saw eyes reflecting in the darkness at the forest edge. Not the red reflection of a normal animal, but bright emerald green, identical to the pendant's jewels. When she blinked, the lights were gone. That night, Diana dreamed of running through moonlit woods, faster than humanly possible. In the dream, she wasn't following the wolves, she was running with them, as one of them. And deep in the forest, ancient stones arranged in a circle hummed with power, calling her home. The first light of dawn found Nate Blackwood on high alert, moving through the forest with purpose. After discovering the North Star camp the previous night, he'd returned to his cabin only long enough to gather supplies for an extended reconnaissance. The wolves had remained agitated, several staying near his cabin rather than returning to their den. Unprecedented behavior that confirmed his concerns. Now, as morning mist drifted between the pines, Nate tracked the movements of Kincaid's team. They'd split into smaller groups, establishing a perimeter with sophisticated equipment. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, small devices driven into the ground at regular intervals that emitted a barely perceptible hum. His military training from decades ago still served him well. He recognized tactical deployment when he saw it. They were establishing a cordon around a 5-mile area, with the sacred place, the nexus, as Margaret called it, somewhere in the center. How they'd narrowed their search this much worried him. For 20 years, he'd protected the location, ensured no maps marked it, no hikers stumbled upon it. One of the North Star teams was approaching dangerously close to the actual location. Nate shadowed them, keeping to dense underbrush, moving with the patience of a man who had learned stillness from predators. 2 men in paramilitary gear carrying equipment cases, followed by a technician with monitoring devices. Their conversation drifted toward him on the morning breeze. "Signal's strongest in this direction," the technician said, consulting a handheld device with a digital readout. "Whatever it is, we're getting closer." "Kincaid says we'll know it when we see it," one of the paramilitary men replied. "Some kind of stone formation, Native American probably." "Or older," the technician suggested. "The energy signature doesn't match anything in our database. It's why we need the suppression grid operational by nightfall." Nate's concern deepened. They had technology specifically designed to locate the nexus, something that could detect its unique energy. Technology that hadn't existed 20 years ago when he'd first stumbled upon the stone circle while tracking a wounded wolf. That day had changed his life forever. A decorated veteran suffering from PTSD, he'd come to the Adirondacks seeking isolation, intending to live out his days in solitude. Instead, he'd found purpose as the Nexus showed him visions of ancient guardians, of the bond between humans and wolves that had protected the sacred place for centuries. Since then, he'd devoted his life to continuing that tradition, becoming something between a hermit and a guardian, known to locals only as Old Man Blackwood, a recluse best left alone. Now North Star threatened everything. If their suppression grid affected the Nexus, the consequences would extend far beyond this forest. Margaret had explained it once. The stone circle was a nexus point where natural energies concentrated, maintaining balance across a vast area. Disturbing it would have ripple effects throughout the ecosystem. The North Star team continued their advance, now less than a mile from the actual location. Nate needed to divert them. He circled around, moving ahead of their path, and selected a large deadfall as his position. Quickly, he set up a small distraction. Nothing obvious, just enough to draw their attention in the wrong direction. He struck a match, lighting a small bundle of green pine needles, then quickly extinguished the flame, leaving the needles smoking. The distinctive scent would carry on the breeze, suggesting a campfire where none existed. As expected, the team altered course to investigate. "Someone else is out here," one man said, hand moving to his sidearm. "Heading southwest." "Probably that Blackwood character locals mentioned," the technician replied. "Kincaid wants him brought in for questioning if possible." Nate retreated silently, leading them further from the Nexus. The diversion would buy time, but it was only temporary. With their technology and manpower, North Star would eventually find what they sought. He needed to warn Margaret, and they needed allies, people who would understand what was at stake. By midday, he'd circled back toward Silverpine, taking forest paths no North Star employee would know existed. The gray wolf from the previous night joined him briefly, loping alongside before vanishing into the underbrush, a confirmation that the pack remained aware of his movements, coordinating with him in their own way. Margaret Clearwater's cabin sat on the reservation land bordering the national forest, a small wooden structure surrounded by herb gardens now dormant under winter snow. Smoke curled from the chimney as Nate approached cautiously, checking for surveillance before making his presence known. Margaret opened the door before he could knock, her weathered face set in concerned lines. "They're getting closer," she said without preamble. "I feel the disruption already." Nate stepped inside, grateful for the warmth after hours in the winter forest. They have technology, Margaret. Something that can detect the energy signature of the Nexus. They're setting up a perimeter with devices they call a suppression grid. Margaret moved to her wood stove, lifting a cast-iron kettle to pour tea into 2 waiting mugs. At 76, her movements remained precise, economical, belying her age. She'd been teaching on the reservation when Nate first came to the mountains, and she was the one who helped him understand what he'd discovered in the forest. "Harrison Kincaid has searched for the Nexus for 40 years, she said, handing him a steaming mug. His father looked for it before him. They've always known something powerful exists in these mountains, but the forest protected its secrets. Until now." "What changed?" Nate asked, warming his hands on the mug. "Why can they suddenly track it?" "The balance weakens," Margaret replied simply. "The connection between guardians thins, but perhaps the forest has planned for this too." She studied him with knowing eyes. "She has arrived." Nate's brow furrowed. "Who?" "Alexandra Sullivan's daughter, Diana. She carries her mother's pendant. The forest has called her, though she does not yet understand why." The name struck Nate like a physical blow. Alexandra Sullivan, a name he hadn't heard in nearly 30 years. A wildlife biologist who had come to study the wolves, who had somehow found the Nexus on her own, and who had disappeared in the forest under mysterious circumstances. Sullivan's daughter? Here in Silverpine? The implications were staggering. Alexandra had possessed an innate connection to the forest, an ability to hear what others couldn't. If her daughter inherited that sensitivity... "She's a scientist like her mother," Margaret continued. "She studies wolves, claims it's academic interest, but the forest called her here. She doesn't understand yet, but she will." A shadow crossed her face. Kincaid recognized her immediately. He'll try to use her, just as he tried with her mother. Nate set down his mug, his expression hardening. "Where is she now? We need to warn her." "She's taken a room at the motel, but warnings will not be enough, Nathaniel. She needs to discover the truth herself in her own way. The pendant will guide her, just as it guided her mother." "We don't have time for spiritual journeys, Margaret. North Star is days, maybe hours from finding the Nexus. If they activate their suppression grid..." He left the consequence unspoken. They both knew what was at stake. Margaret's expression remained serene, untroubled by his urgency. "Some paths cannot be rushed, old friend. Diana Sullivan must awaken to her heritage naturally. But perhaps you can arrange a meeting that seems like chance." She smiled faintly. The wolves have always been good at arranging such things. Nate understood her meaning. The wolves had led him to the Nexus decades ago. They had brought others with the right sensitivity throughout history. Perhaps they would recognize Alexandra Sullivan's daughter as they had recognized her mother. "I'll return to the forest," he decided. "Monitor North Star's movements, delay them where I can. If the opportunity arises to make contact with Sullivan's daughter..." He didn't finish the thought. 20 years as a recluse had left his social skills rusty at best. The prospect of approaching a young academic from the city, explaining something that defied scientific explanation, was daunting. Margaret reached across the table, her hand covering his briefly. "The forest didn't choose you for your conversation skills, Nathaniel. It chose you for your heart. When the time comes, you'll find the right words." He departed as dusk approached, taking a circuitous route back toward the deep forest. North Star patrols had increased. Twice he had to freeze in cover as teams with advanced equipment passed nearby. Their technology gave them advantages, but this remained his forest. He knew every hollow, every game trail, every place where shadows gathered. Night had fallen completely when Nate reached a ridgeline overlooking the vast expanse of forest. From this vantage point, he could see the subtle evidence of North Star's operation: small lights moving through the darkness, the occasional glint of equipment. They were establishing their perimeter, tightening the noose around the Nexus. A howl rose from the valley below, answered by others throughout the forest. The wolves were communicating, coordinating. Nate listened carefully, having learned to distinguish nuance in their calls over the years. This wasn't a hunting chorus or territorial warning. It was something he'd heard only rarely, a summoning. The wolves had found something, or someone. Diana woke before dawn, the silver pendant warm against her skin. Her dreams had been vivid, running through the forest, ancient stones humming with energy, and a massive black wolf with intelligent eyes watching her from a granite outcropping. For a scientist who prided herself on rational thinking, these persistent dreams were becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. She dressed quickly in thermal layers, topped with a red flannel shirt and sturdy hiking pants. Today she would begin her field observations, establishing baseline data on the wolf pack's territory and movement patterns. Standard research procedure, documented meticulously. This was familiar ground, comfortable and predictable. The motel owner raised an eyebrow when she requested a packed lunch at such an early hour, but provided a simple meal of sandwiches and fruit without comment. Diana loaded her backpack with essentials: water, food, first aid kit, binoculars, GPS, notebook, and extra layers. The morning temperature hovered just above freezing, but the forecast promised clear skies and slight warming as the day progressed. She drove her Subaru to the forest access road she'd identified during her research planning, parking at a small turnout marked as a trailhead. The sun had just cleared the eastern mountains, bathing the snow-covered landscape in golden light. Diana paused to appreciate the view. Ancient mountains softened by time, valleys carved by glaciers, forests that had regenerated after the logging booms of previous centuries. This land had stories to tell. The pendant seemed to pulse against her skin as she started along the trail, almost as if responding to the forest around her. Diana tried to focus on her scientific objectives, but Margaret Clearwater's words kept intruding. "The forest called you here. Your mother found something in these woods, something Kincaid has sought for 40 years. 2 hours into her hike, Diana reached a promising observation point, a rocky outcropping overlooking a meadow where deer tracks suggested regular feeding activity. Predators often patrolled such areas. She set up her observation post, arranging her equipment methodically while scanning the area with her binoculars. The forest spread before her, a complex tapestry of pine, hemlock, and bare-branched, deciduous trees. Fresh snow captured tracks of various creatures: deer, rabbits, fox, and what appeared to be wolf prints along the meadow's edge. Recent activity, promising for her research. Diana settled in, notebook open, prepared for the long periods of inactivity that wildlife observation required. Patience was essential in fieldwork. Hours could pass with no significant sightings, but something felt different today. The forest seemed to hold its breath around her. Birds had fallen silent. Even the wind had died down, leaving an unnatural stillness. The pendant against her chest grew warmer. Diana removed it from beneath her clothing, studying the silver wolf with its emerald eyes. In the daylight, she noticed details missed before. Tiny runes or symbols etched along the wolf's body, almost microscopic but precisely rendered. A twig snapped in the forest behind her. Diana turned sharply, her hand instinctively going to the bear spray on her belt. 20 yards away, partially obscured by a hemlock, stood a wolf. Not just any wolf, a massive black specimen, larger than any she'd documented in her research. It stood perfectly still, amber eyes fixed on her with unsettling intelligence. The animal from her dreams. Diana remained motionless, her training taking over. No sudden movements, no direct eye contact, no running. She slowly reached for her camera, the researcher in her automatically documenting despite the unexpected encounter. The wolf made no aggressive move. It simply watched her, its posture relaxed rather than hunting ready. After a long moment, it turned slightly, looking over its shoulder before returning its gaze to her. The gesture seemed almost human in its clear communication. "Follow me." The rational part of Diana's mind recognized the danger. Following a wild predator into unknown forest went against every safety protocol. Yet the pendant burned against her skin, and something deeper than reason urged her forward. This wolf was connected to her dreams, to her mother's pendant, to the mysteries Margaret had hinted at. "I must be losing my mind," Diana muttered, securing her backpack and rising slowly. The wolf waited, watching as she gathered her equipment, then turned and walked unhurriedly into the trees. Diana followed, maintaining a respectful distance. The wolf moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure she kept pace. It led her away from established trails, through dense underbrush and across small streams. Under normal circumstances, Diana would have marked her path or used GPS to track her location, but something told her this journey required her full attention on the guide rather than technology. They traveled for nearly an hour, moving deeper into the forest than Diana had planned to venture on her first day. The terrain grew rougher, the forest older. Ancient hemlocks and white pines towered overhead, their massive trunks suggesting centuries of growth. The modern world seemed to recede with each step, as though she were walking back through time. The wolf paused at the base of a steep ridge, looking back at Diana expectantly. She caught her breath, taking a sip from her water bottle while studying the animal. Its behavior defied everything she knew about wolf ecology. Wild wolves avoided humans. They certainly didn't lead them through forests with apparent purpose. "Where are you taking me?" she asked aloud, not expecting an answer. The wolf's ears perked forward. It stared at her with those intelligent eyes, then continued up the ridge, following a barely visible game trail. Diana hesitated only briefly before following. The climb was challenging, requiring her to use tree roots and rock outcroppings as handholds. Near the top, the wolf disappeared over the crest. Diana pulled herself up the final few feet, emerging onto a small plateau. What she saw stopped her breath. A perfect circle of standing stones, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, occupied the center of the plateau. The stones weren't massive like Stonehenge. Most stood about 4 feet tall, but they were arranged with obvious precision. At the circle's center stood a larger stone, its surface covered with symbols similar to those on her pendant. The black wolf sat just outside the circle, watching her reaction. "This is impossible," Diana whispered. No archaeological survey had ever documented a stone circle in the Adirondacks. No indigenous site of this nature had been recorded in any academic literature she'd encountered. The pendant against her skin now felt hot enough to burn. Acting on instinct, Diana removed it from around her neck, holding it in her palm as she approached the circle. The silver seemed to vibrate, the tiny emerald eyes of the wolf figurine glowing with an inner light that couldn't be explained by sunshine alone. As she stepped between two of the standing stones, entering the circle, a sensation like static electricity washed over her skin. The forest sounds, already distant, faded completely, replaced by a subtle humming that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. The central stone drew her forward, its symbols now appearing to shift and move, though she knew that had to be an optical illusion. The black wolf remained outside the circle, watching intently, but making no move to follow her. Diana approached the central stone, the pendant in her outstretched hand moving as though drawn by magnetic force. When the silver wolf touched the stone's surface, a surge of energy flowed through Diana's arm, spreading throughout her body. The humming intensified, and the world around her blurred. Visions flashed through her mind. Indigenous people performing ceremonies within the circle, European settlers avoiding the area due to inexplicable fears, her mother standing exactly where Diana stood now, pendant in hand. And throughout the visions, wolves watched from the periphery, generation after generation guarding this place. The experience lasted only seconds, but felt like hours. When reality reasserted itself, Diana found herself kneeling before the central stone, the pendant clutched tightly in her hand. The humming had subsided to a gentle vibration she felt, rather than heard. "Hello, Diana Sullivan." The voice came from behind her. Diana whirled, still disoriented from the vision, to find herself facing a man she'd never met but instantly recognized from the townsfolk's descriptions. Tall, weathered, with a silver-streaked beard and penetrating blue eyes. This could only be the reclusive Nathaniel Blackwood. He stood just inside the stone circle, a rifle slung across his back, dressed for the wilderness in well-worn outdoor gear. "You're Blackwood," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "The hermit everyone in town talks about." A faint smile crossed his face. And you're Alexandra Sullivan's daughter. You have her eyes, and her connection to this place. He nodded toward the pendant in her hand. I see the Nexus recognized you, just as it recognized her 30 years ago. Diana glanced at the black wolf, still sitting patiently outside the circle. Did you train that animal? Is this some kind of elaborate setup? Nate followed her gaze, genuine respect in his expression as he regarded the wolf. How? No one trains an alpha, Dr. Sullivan. He chose to bring you here. The wolves recognize those who can hear the forest, just as they recognized your mother. The mention of her mother again sent a chill through Diana. You knew her? Yes, Nate replied simply. She found this place on her own, drawn to it just as you were. She understood what it was, what it meant. That understanding put her in danger. Diana rose to her feet, scientific skepticism warring with the undeniable experience she'd just had. What is this place? These stones don't match any known indigenous structures in the region. The people who built this circle left no other traces for archaeologists to find, Nate explained, approaching the central stone. The Nexus is older than any recorded history of this continent. Margaret Clearwater's ancestors found it, protected it, incorporated it into their understanding of the world. I found it 20 years ago while tracking a wounded wolf. Your mother found it while researching wolf territory. The forest chooses its guardians carefully. Diana's academic mind searched for rational explanations. A hoax, a modern construction, a hallucination brought on by suggestion and isolation. But the pendant in her hand still thrummed with energy, and the visions she'd experienced contained details about her mother no stranger could have known. North Star is looking for this place, she said, the conversation at the bar coming back to her. They have equipment, sensors, something about a suppression grid. Nate's expression darkened. Harrison Kincaid has sought the Nexus for decades, following in his father's footsteps. They believe the energy here can be harnessed, weaponized. They're right, but they don't understand the consequences. The Nexus maintains balance across the entire region. Disrupting it would have catastrophic effects. Ecological effects? Diana asked, falling back on familiar scientific terminology. That's one aspect, Nate acknowledged. But the Nexus connects more than just the natural world. It's a focal point for energies you might call spiritual or metaphysical. Indigenous people understood this. Your mother understood it. Kincaid sees only power to be exploited. The black wolf stood suddenly, ears forward, alert to something beyond human perception. A low growl rumbled in its throat. Nate tensed, his hand moving to the rifle on his back. They're coming. North Star's teams are moving faster than I anticipated. Diana listened, but heard nothing beyond normal forest sounds. How do you know? The wolves know, he replied simply. And now, so do you. Focus on the pendant, on the connection you felt. The forest is trying to warn you. Skepticism wavered as Diana realized she did feel something. A distant disruption, like static interfering with a clear signal. The pendant in her hand pulsed in rhythm with the sensation. We need to leave, Nate said urgently. If Kincaid's men find you here with me, they'll know exactly what you are. Another potential guardian, like your mother. That would make you a target. What happened to my mother? Diana demanded, not moving. Everyone says she died in a hiking accident, but that's not true, is it? Nate's expression softened slightly, compassion breaking through his urgency. Your mother discovered what Kincaid was planning. She tried to stop him, to expose him. She disappeared in this forest shortly after. I searched for weeks, but never found her. He glanced at the black wolf. The pack knows, but some stories they keep to themselves. The wolf's growl deepened, its attention fixed on the forest to the east. We're out of time, Nate insisted. We need to move. I can tell you everything I know about your mother once we're safe. Diana hesitated only briefly before nodding. She slipped the pendant back around her neck, feeling its warmth against her skin, a connection to her mother, to this place, to mysteries she was only beginning to comprehend. As they left the stone circle, the humming faded from her awareness, But something remained, a subtle awareness of the forest around her, of energies flowing through trees and earth. The black wolf led them away from the plateau, taking a different route than their approach. Nate followed without question, his movements nearly as silent as the wolf's despite his size. Diana matched their pace as best she could, her mind racing with questions. Scientific training demanded skepticism, evidence, peer review. But the pendant against her skin, the visions she'd experienced, the inexplicable behavior of the wolf, these things existed outside the framework of conventional science. "If what you're saying is true," she said, as they descended into a steep ravine, "if this nexus is as important as you claim, why hasn't anyone documented it? Why isn't it protected?" "It is protected," Nate replied without slowing. "By the forest itself, by the wolves, by people like Margaret Clearwater, and now by you, whether you accept that role or not. The pendant wouldn't have responded to you otherwise." They emerged from the ravine into a dense stand of hemlocks. The black wolf suddenly stopped, hackles rising. A low, warning growl emanated from deep in its chest. Nate signaled for Diana to stop, his posture instantly alert. He pointed silently to a small device attached to a nearby tree, a motion sensor with North Star's logo emblazoned on its casing. "They've expanded their perimeter faster than I thought," he whispered. "We need to be careful. These sensors connect to their central monitoring system. If we trigger too many, they'll triangulate our position." The wolf turned, taking yet another direction. Nate and Diana followed, moving with increased caution. Diana found herself instinctively stepping where the wolf stepped, matching its silent progress through the underbrush. The pendant guided her somehow, suggesting movements that avoided breaking twigs or disturbing the forest floor. They had traveled perhaps a mile when the distinctive sound of voices carried through the trees. Men talking, equipment being moved. The wolf froze, then melted into the underbrush with supernatural stealth. Nate touched Diana's arm, pointing to a fallen log where they could observe while remaining hidden. From this vantage point, they saw 4 men in North Star uniforms setting up a strange device on a tripod. The apparatus resembled a satellite dish, but smaller, with unusual components Diana couldn't identify. "Part of the suppression grid," Nate whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Designed to disrupt the energy patterns of the nexus. They're establishing a perimeter around the entire area." One of the men checked a handheld device, adjusting the tripod's orientation. "Energy signature is stronger than expected in this sector," he called to his colleagues. "Kincaid was right. We're getting closer." "Any sign of wildlife interference?" another asked. "Those wolves have been shadowing us since we started setup. Nothing on motion sensors. The sonic deterrents seem to be working." The first man made a final adjustment to the device. "Activation in 3, 2, 1. A high-pitched whine, just at the threshold of human hearing, emanated from the apparatus. Diana winced at the painful sound, but Nate's reaction was far more severe. He clutched his head, a grimace of agony crossing his weathered features. Years of connection to the nexus had heightened his sensitivity. The pendant at Diana's throat grew cold, not merely cool, but ice-cold against her skin. The forest itself seemed to recoil from the sound, a disturbance rippling through the energy she'd only just begun to perceive. From the deep forest came a chorus of wolf howls, not hunting calls or territorial warnings, but sounds of distress. The North Star team exchanged satisfied looks. "Sonic deterrent working as expected," one reported into a radio. "Wolfpack responding exactly as predicted. They'll be driven out of the target zone within hours." "Good," came the reply, the voice unmistakably Harrison Kincaid's. "Maintain the perimeter. If you encounter Blackwood, detain him. If you find Dr. Sullivan, escort her back to base. She doesn't understand what she's gotten herself into." Diana's blood ran cold at the mention of her name. Kincaid knew she was in the forest, knew she might be with Nate. The corporation's interest in her went beyond professional courtesy. Nate tugged her sleeve, indicating they should retreat. The pain in his eyes concerned her, but he moved with determination despite it. They crawled backward until they were beyond the device's immediate range, then rose to continue their escape. The black wolf reappeared briefly on a ridge above them, then vanished again. Scouting ahead, Diana realized, finding a path through North Star's expanding perimeter. The suppression devices affect you, she observed as they moved through the forest. Because of your connection to the Nexus. Nate nodded grimly. 20 years as Guardian changes a person. The forest speaks more clearly, but the disruption hurts more too. He studied her with concern. You felt it as well. The pendant reacted. Diana couldn't deny it. It turned cold, and I felt something, like dissonance in music. Your sensitivity is awakening, just as your mother's did, Nate explained. The pendant accelerates the process. It belonged to a guardian from centuries ago, passed down through your maternal line. They continued in silence for some time, following the Black Wolf's guidance when it appeared, navigating by Nate's experience when it didn't. Twice they spotted North Star teams in the distance and changed course to avoid them. By late afternoon, the forest had grown darker, more primeval. Ancient trees towered overhead, their massive trunks testifying to centuries of growth. No trails existed here, no evidence of human passage. Diana's scientific mind noted the ecological indicators of old-growth forest, undisturbed by logging or development, a rarity in the eastern United States. They emerged into a small clearing dominated by a cabin built from hand-hewn logs, its construction blending so perfectly with the surrounding forest that it seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and stacked firewood lined one wall. "My home," Nate said simply. "As safe as anywhere in this forest can be, at least for tonight." The Black Wolf materialized from the forest edge, approaching the cabin with familiar ease. It settled on the covered porch, watching them with those intelligent amber eyes. "He comes and goes as he pleases," Nate explained, noticing Diana's questioning look. "We have an understanding. 20 years ago, he led me to the Nexus, just as he led you today. I stopped questioning coincidence long ago." Inside, the cabin was Spartan but comfortable. A wood stove provided heat, its warmth welcome after hours in the winter forest. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on ecology, indigenous history, and wilderness survival. A ham radio sat on a small desk, alongside maps of the region marked with handwritten notes. Diana removed her backpack, accepting the cup of tea Nate prepared on the stove. The pendant had returned to its normal temperature, but she remained acutely aware of its presence. The visions at the Nexus, the strange connection to the wolf, the disruption caused by North Star's devices, these experiences had shifted something fundamental in her perception. "You said you'd tell me about my mother," she said finally, cradling the warm mug in her hands, "about what really happened to her." Nate sighed heavily, settling into a worn armchair across from her. In the cabin's soft light, the years etched into his face became more apparent, not merely age, but the weight of solitude and responsibility. "Alexandra Sullivan was brilliant," he began. "A scientist like you, but with an intuition that went beyond conventional research. She came to study the wolves, but found something far more significant. The Nexus called to her as it called to you." He described how Alexandra had discovered the stone circle independently, how the pendant had awakened her latent sensitivity to the forest's energies, how she had begun documenting the Nexus not just as an archaeological site, but as a living system that maintained balance throughout the region. "She discovered Kincaid's interest in the site," Nate continued. "His father's company had been searching for decades, using increasingly advanced technology. Alexandra realized what they intended, to harness the Nexus energy for weapons development. She gathered evidence, prepared to expose them." "But she never got the chance," Diana finished quietly. Nate's eyes held ancient grief. "She disappeared 3 days before she was scheduled to meet with federal officials. The official report called it a hiking accident. I knew better. I'd been helping her, showing her how to move through the forest undetected. She wouldn't have made amateur mistakes." "You think Kincaid was responsible?" It wasn't a question. "I've never found proof," Nate admitted, "just as I never found her body. But the wolves mourned. They knew." Diana stared into the depths of her tea, processing this revelation about her mother's fate. The official story had never satisfied her, but the alternative, that her mother had been silenced to protect corporate interests, opened wounds she'd thought long healed. "And now, Kincaid has found me," she murmured, history repeating itself. "Not if we can help it," Nate replied, his voice hardening with resolve. "Your mother fought alone. You have allies, me, Margaret, the wolves, and you have something Alexandra didn't have time to develop fully, a growing connection to the Nexus itself." Outside, darkness had fallen completely. Through the cabin's small windows, Diana could see nothing but her own reflection against the black glass. Yet she sensed the forest beyond, living, breathing, aware in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. The black wolf howled once, the sound carrying through the night. Others answered from distant ridges, a chorus of voices communicating in a language Diana suddenly, inexplicably, understood at some fundamental level. They were calling a council. Something approached. The forest prepared. The pendant warmed against her skin, a gentle pulse like a second heartbeat. Diana looked across at Nate, this strange hermit who had devoted his life to protecting something most people would never understand. His expression told her he heard the wolves too, that he understood their message. "North Star is accelerating their timeline," he said grimly. "The suppression grid will be operational by dawn." Diana's hand closed around the silver pendant, drawing strength from its warmth. "Then we have work to do." The darkness before dawn embraced Diana Sullivan as she stood on the porch of Nate's cabin. Sleep had come in restless fragments, her dreams filled with stone circles and wolves with emerald eyes. Now, as the forest held its breath in the space between night and day, she felt more alert than she had any right to be. The pendant rested against her skin, neither hot nor cold, simply present, a constant reminder of her mother's legacy and the responsibility now passing to her. Nate emerged from the cabin, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His movements were efficient, deliberate, the actions of a man who had learned to conserve energy through years in the wilderness. Despite his age, he radiated a vitality born of purpose rather than youth. "The wolves were active all night," he said, handing her a mug. "Scouting, communicating. The Alpha gathered them from across their territory." Diana nodded, sipping the strong black coffee. She had heard the howls throughout the night, had felt their meaning reverberate through her consciousness in a way that defied rational explanation. "They're forming a perimeter of their own, challenging North Stars." Nate glanced at her sharply, surprise flickering across his weathered features. "You understood that?" "Not in words," Diana admitted. "But in meaning, yes. Is that normal?" A ghost of a smile touched Nate's lips. "Your sensitivity is developing faster than I expected. The pendant accelerates the process, but you must have inherited strong potential from your mother." He gazed into the lightening forest. "It took me years to understand the wolves that clearly." The black wolf appeared at the tree line as if summoned by their conversation. In the pre-dawn light, Diana could see details she'd missed before, silver streaks in its muzzle suggesting advanced age, a crescent scar above its right eye, the unusual amber gold of its eyes. It watched them with unnerving intelligence. "He wants us to follow," Diana said, the knowledge arising from somewhere beyond conscious thought. Nate nodded grimly. "The council has gathered. It's time." They dressed for the wilderness, additional layers against the morning chill, sturdy boots, equipment packs containing water and emergency supplies. Nate added a few items Diana didn't recognize, wrapped in leather pouches, things Margaret Clearwater had given him years ago, he explained, for ceremonies at the Nexus. As they departed the cabin, following the black wolf into the forest, the eastern horizon had just begun to blush with dawn's first light. The wolf set a demanding pace, leading them along game trails invisible to untrained eyes. Diana found herself moving with increasing confidence through the dense undergrowth, her steps unconsciously matching the rhythm of the forest, avoiding twigs and dry leaves that might betray their presence. After an hour of steady travel, the wolf slowed, its posture alert. Ahead, a faint electronic hum disturbed the natural symphony of the awakening forest, one of North Star's devices. Nate signaled for Diana to stop, pointing out the nearly invisible sensor attached to a hemlock 20 yards ahead. Then he indicated a route that would take them wide around the device's detection range. They proceeded with heightened caution, every step calculated, every breath measured. "They've established their perimeter," Nate whispered when they were safely past. "But it's incomplete. There are gaps." "Intentional?" Diana asked. "Possibly. Kincaid is clever. He might be creating funnels, directing wildlife, and us, exactly where he wants." The thought was unsettling. Diana touched the pendant through her clothing, drawing reassurance from its steady warmth. The forest felt different today, tense, expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The pendant amplified this awareness, translating the forest's state into impressions her human consciousness could interpret. The black wolf led them deeper into the ancient forest, up steep ridgelines and through valleys untouched by logging. Twice more they circumvented North Star sensors, and once they froze in the shadow of a massive fallen oak as a patrol passed within 30 yards. 2 armed men checking equipment readings, unaware of the observers holding their breath in perfect stillness. Diana noticed Nate occasionally wincing, pressing his fingers to his temples. The increasing number of suppression devices was affecting him, the disruption to the natural energy causing physical discomfort. Yet he pushed forward without complaint, his determination evident in every line of his body. The sun had fully risen, filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns when they reached their destination. The wolf had brought them to a secluded valley nestled between 2 steep ridges. Ancient hemlocks formed a natural cathedral, their branches creating a living roof hundreds of feet overhead. In the valley's center stood a massive oak that predated European settlement, its sprawling limbs reaching outward like protective arms. Beneath this tree, waiting in respectful silence, sat Margaret Clearwater. The elderly woman's presence surprised Diana. How had someone of Margaret's age navigated this difficult terrain? Yet there she was, serene and dignified, a colorful blanket spread beneath her. More surprising still were the wolves. At least 15 of them positioned throughout the valley, lying or sitting in watchful stillness. The pack had gathered in its entirety, a behavior that defied everything Diana had studied about wolf ecology. Predators did not assemble like this, did not sit in council like elders of a tribe. Yet here they were, with the black alpha at their center, regarding the humans with intelligent expectation. "The Council of Guardians," Nate explained softly as they approached, "called only in times of greatest need." Margaret raised a hand in greeting, her dark eyes evaluating Diana with ancient wisdom. "The daughter of Alexandra has come to the council." The circle continues. Diana felt simultaneously out of place and exactly where she belonged. The scientist in her struggled to categorize this experience, to file it under anthropological observation or wildlife behavior study. But the part of her that responded to the pendant, that understood the wolves' howls, recognized the profound significance of this gathering. "Please sit," Margaret indicated the blanket beside her. "The forest has much to tell us, and little time remains." Diana joined the elders beneath the ancient oak. The black wolf approached, lying down directly in front of them, its powerful presence completing their circle. Other wolves maintained their positions throughout the valley, alert sentinels guarding the council. "North Star has accelerated their timeline," Nate began without preamble. "The suppression grid will be fully operational by midday. Once activated, it will sever the connection between the Nexus and the surrounding forest. The consequences will extend far beyond this valley." Margaret nodded gravely. "The balance maintained by the Nexus reaches throughout these mountains, throughout the watershed. Disrupt it, and ecological systems will collapse across the entire region. But that is only the beginning of the damage." "Kincaid believes he can harvest the energy," Nate continued. "Channel it, weaponize it. He doesn't understand that the energy exists to maintain balance, not to be extracted." Diana tried to process these revelations through her scientific worldview. "You're talking about some kind of energy field that affects ecosystems, like a localized climate system?" "That is the physical manifestation," Margaret explained patiently. "But the nexus is more. It is where the spirit of the land concentrates, where the boundary between worlds thins. Indigenous people have protected such places for thousands of years. The wolves have guarded this one even longer." The black wolf lifted its head, meeting Diana's eyes with unsettling directness. Through the pendant, she felt its thoughts, not in human language, but in concepts, emotions, memories stretching back generations. The wolf was ancient, had witnessed the arrival of European settlers, had guided guardians to the nexus throughout its long life. It had known her mother. "You're saying this wolf is centuries old?" Diana asked, the scientist in her rebelling against the impossibility. "The alpha exists differently," Margaret replied, "part spirit, part flesh. The nexus sustains him as he sustains the nexus. They are connected, as all guardians become connected." She studied Diana closely. "As you are becoming connected." Diana touched the pendant, aware of how it had changed her perception since arriving in Silverpine. The forest spoke to her now in impressions and intuitions. The wolves' howls carried meaning. The nexus had shown her visions. These experiences defied scientific explanation, yet she could not deny their reality. "What about my mother?" she asked. "Did she experience this too?" Pain flickered across Nate's weathered face. "Alexandra embraced her connection to the nexus more quickly than anyone I've ever seen. She understood immediately what was at stake. That's why Kincaid feared her, why he couldn't finish the sentence. "She isn't dead," Margaret said quietly. "Not as you understand death." Diana's heart lurched painfully. "What do you mean?" The elderly woman gestured to the forest around them. "When guardians give their lives protecting the nexus, they join with it, become part of the forest consciousness. Your mother confronted Kincaid directly when she discovered his plans. The choice she made saved the nexus then, but her sacrifice was not the end of her existence." "The white wolf," Diana whispered, remembering the mysterious creature from her dreams. "That's her?" Margaret nodded solemnly. "A manifestation of her spirit, still protecting what she loved, still guiding those who can see." Grief and wonder collided in Diana's chest. The scientific rationalist in her wanted to dismiss these claims as superstition or metaphor. But the pendant pulsed against her skin, and somewhere deep in her consciousness, she felt the truth of Margaret's words. Her mother's essence remained, transformed but present. "Kincaid knows this," Nate said grimly. "He spent decades studying the nexus, learning its secrets through whatever means necessary. His father began the research, but Harrison has taken it further, developed technology specifically designed to capture and redirect the energy. If he succeeds," Margaret added, "the balance will collapse, the forest will die, the wolves will perish, and whatever power Kincaid extracts will corrupt him completely. No human is meant to control such energy alone. It exists to be shared, to flow through the web of life." Diana processed this information, trying to bridge the gap between her scientific training and the mystical reality they described. "How do we stop him? North Star has resources, manpower, technology. We're 3 people and a pack of wolves." The black alpha wolf rose to its feet, radiating power and purpose. Through the pendant, Diana felt, rather than heard, its response. "We are more than enough, if we act as one." "The wolf speaks truth," Margaret said, confirming Diana's unspoken understanding. "The nexus defends itself through its guardians, but we must reach it before the suppression grid activates completely. We must reconnect the energy channels Kincaid has already disrupted." "And that's where you come in," Nate told Diana, his blue eyes intense. "Your bloodline carries the strongest connection to the nexus. Margaret and I can support the ritual, but only you can fully restore the balance." "Ritual?" Diana echoed, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "I don't know any rituals. I'm an ecologist, not a shaman." Margaret smiled gently. "The knowledge is in your blood, in the pendant, in your dreams. Trust what you feel, not just what you think." The black wolf moved toward the edge of the clearing, looking back expectantly. The other wolves rose in unison, forming a protective circle around the three humans. The council had ended. Action would now replace words. Diana stood, feeling the weight of expectation pressing upon her. Yesterday, she had been a scientist conducting field research. Today, she was being asked to perform mystical rituals to save an ancient energy nexus from corporate exploitation. The rational part of her mind struggled with this transition, but the pendant's warmth against her skin anchored her to this new reality. "How much time do we have?" she asked Nate as they gathered their equipment. 3 hours, maybe 4 before the grid is fully operational, he replied. But the window for effective intervention shrinks with each device they activate. Then we should hurry, Diana said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. They departed the council site, the Black Alpha leading with Margaret directly behind him, supported by a walking stick that seemed to appear from nowhere. Diana marveled at the elderly woman's unexpected stamina as they began the ascent toward the ridge above. The other wolves moved like shadows through the forest around them, a protective escort utilizing terrain with instinctive efficiency. Halfway up the steep slope, Diana sensed rather than heard an electronic pulse rippling through the forest. The pendant turned cold against her skin. Nearby, Nate stumbled, pressing his palms against his temples. "Another suppressor activated," he gasped, the pain evident in his voice. "Northeast quadrant. They're closing the circle." Diana steadied him with a hand on his arm, concerned by the growing intensity of his reactions. 20 years connected to the Nexus had made him vulnerable to the disruption in ways she was only beginning to experience. "We need to hurry," Margaret urged, her ancient eyes filled with concern. "Nathaniel's connection runs deep. Each activated device causes him pain." They continued their ascent, moving as quickly as safety allowed. Diana found herself instinctively avoiding deadfall and loose rocks, her body responding to the forest with increasing attunement. The pendant guided her, subtly influencing her movements, helping her navigate as though she had walked these pathways all her life. At the ridge summit, the black wolf paused, hackles rising. A low growl rumbled in its chest. Through the pendant, Diana sensed its warning. Human presence ahead, machines, disruption. Nate signaled for them to take cover behind a granite outcropping. Below, in a small clearing, 3 North Star employees worked around equipment similar to what they had observed the previous day. A tripod-mounted device emitted the barely audible high-frequency sound that caused Nate such discomfort. 2 armed security personnel stood guard nearby. "We need to disable it," Diana whispered. "It's directly in our path to the Nexus." "The guards are armed with the specialized ammunition," Nate warned. "Silver composite with rare earth elements, lethal to normal wildlife, devastating to anything connected to the Nexus." The wolves circled silently through the underbrush, positioning themselves around the clearing. The Alpha remained with the humans, awaiting a decision. Diana felt the pack's readiness, their willingness to attack despite the danger. But such direct confrontation would likely end in wolf casualties. "Wait," Diana said, an idea forming. She removed the pendant from around her neck, holding it in her palm. "The Nexus energy flows through the Earth itself, right? That's what these devices disrupt?" Margaret nodded. "The energy channels follow ancient pathways, what some cultures call ley lines." "Then perhaps we can redirect it, just for a moment." Diana closed her eyes, concentrating on the pendant. She visualized the energy flowing beneath them, diverted by the suppressor but not completely blocked. If the pendant could help her sense the energy, perhaps it could also help her influence it. The silver wolf grew warm in her palm, the tiny emerald eyes beginning to glow with inner light. Diana directed her focus downward, seeking the disrupted energy flow, finding it, gently encouraging it to surge upward at the suppressor's location. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a sharp crack echoed through the clearing as the tripod device sparked and smoked. The North Star technicians jumped back, shouting in surprise. The high-frequency sound abruptly ceased. "Equipment failure," one called, examining the damaged device. "Power surge fried the circuits." "Check the backup systems," another ordered. "Kincaid wants this grid operational without gaps." Nate stared at Diana, astonishment evident in his expression. How did you do that?" "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted, replacing the pendant around her neck. "I just felt the energy and suggested a new path. The pendant helped focus my intention." Margaret nodded approvingly. Alexandra's daughter remembers more than she knows. The disruption created the diversion they needed. While the North Star team focused on their malfunctioning equipment, the three humans slipped past, following a route the wolves indicated would avoid motion sensors. The pack moved with them, silent shadows providing protection and guidance. As they progressed toward the Nexus, Diana sensed the forest's increasing vitality. Despite North Star's suppression grid, the area immediately surrounding the stone circle remained vibrant, resistant to technological interference. Plant life grew more lush, wildlife more abundant. Birdsong filled the air, a stark contrast to the unnatural silence near the suppressor devices. "The Nexus strengthens its defenses," Margaret explained, noticing Diana's observation. "It draws energy inward to protect its core, but this cannot last indefinitely. Eventually, the suppressors will overcome even this sanctuary." They climbed another ridge, and suddenly the stone circle came into view in the valley below. Even from a distance, Diana could see changes since her first visit. The stones seemed to shimmer slightly, a heat mirage effect that distorted the air around them. At the circle's center, the largest stone pulsed with faint luminescence, visible even in daylight. But the approaching threat was equally apparent. North Star had established positions on 3 sides of the valley, teams setting up equipment at strategic locations. From their vantage point, Diana counted at least 15 personnel, including armed security. More concerning were the 4 large devices being assembled, significantly larger than the suppressors they had encountered previously. "Harvesting equipment," Nate said grimly, "designed to capture and redirect the Nexus energy once the suppressors have weakened its natural defenses." "How do they expect to transport energy?" Diana asked, the scientist in her still seeking rational explanations. "Quantum entanglement technology," Nate replied, surprising her with his technical knowledge. "Kincaid has invested millions in research. The energy isn't physical in the conventional sense, it's informational, patterned. His devices create resonance that allows transfer without physical connection." Diana studied the North Star operation with growing concern. Their systematic approach suggested detailed planning, perhaps years of preparation. Kincaid had waited decades for this opportunity, developing specialized technology while searching for the precise location. How could 3 people possibly counter such a well-resourced operation? The black alpha wolf appeared beside her, its amber eyes meeting hers. Through the pendant, she felt rather than heard its message. Numbers and machines matter less than connection. The Nexus chooses its defenders. Trust what you feel. Diana nodded, drawing strength from the wolf's unwavering confidence. "We need to reach the center stone," she told Nate and Margaret. "That's where the ritual must be performed?" "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "The center stone is the focal point. From there you can re-establish the connections that the suppressors have damaged." "Getting there won't be easy," Nate observed, studying the North Star perimeter. "They've positioned security to control access from all obvious approaches." The alpha wolf turned, moving along the ridgeline to a point overlooking the eastern edge of the valley. Diana followed, with Nate and Margaret close behind. From this new vantage point, she saw what the wolf had already identified: a steep ravine cutting through the ridge, descending directly toward the stone circle. The approach would be challenging, requiring them to navigate loose rock and dense vegetation, but it remained unguarded. "They haven't secured that access point," Diana noted. "Perhaps they thought it too difficult for human passage. Or their sensors can't function effectively in the ravine," Nate suggested. "The rock formations might create interference." "The wolves use this path," Margaret said with certainty. "The alpha shows us the Guardian's route." The descent through the ravine proved as challenging as it appeared. Loose shale slipped beneath their boots, forcing them to use saplings and exposed roots as handholds. Diana helped Margaret navigate the steeper sections, impressed by the elderly woman's determination despite her age. Nate moved with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had spent decades in wilderness terrain. The wolves accompanied them, some ahead, scouting the path, others behind, guarding against pursuit. The black alpha remained close to the humans, occasionally indicating safer routes with subtle movements. As they approached the valley floor, Diana felt the nexus energy intensifying around her. The pendant grew warmer, pulsing in rhythm with the beating heart of the forest. Nearby, flowers turned their faces toward them as they passed, regardless of the sun's position. Small creatures, squirrels, birds, even a fox, appeared briefly before darting away, as if acknowledging their presence. "The forest recognizes you," Margaret observed. "It remembers your bloodline." They paused at the ravine's mouth, still concealed by dense vegetation, to assess the situation in the valley. North Star's operation had progressed during their descent. The harvesting equipment now stood fully assembled, connected by fiber optic cables to a central control station. Technicians moved between positions, checking readings, making adjustments. Armed security patrolled the perimeter, weapons ready. "Their grid is nearly complete," Nate said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have minutes, not hours." Diana studied the stone circle, now just 50 yards away across open ground. The shimmering effect had intensified, creating a visible dome of distorted air above the stones. Within this dome, plant life seemed more vibrant, colors more intense. The boundary between worlds thinned, just as Margaret had described. "We need a diversion," Diana decided, "something to draw their attention away from the stone circle long enough for us to reach it." The alpha wolf's ears pricked forward, sensing her intention. Through the pendant, Diana felt its response, a willingness to create exactly the distraction they needed. The rest of the pack would follow its lead. "No," Diana said aloud, responding to the unspoken offer. "It's too dangerous. They have weapons specifically designed to harm you." The wolf's amber eyes held steady on hers, its message clear even without the pendant's connection. "This is our purpose. We have guarded the nexus for generations. We accept the risk." Before Diana could protest further, the alpha threw back its head and howled, a sound of such power and resonance that it seemed to shake the very air. Throughout the valley, other wolves answered, their voices joining in a chorus that echoed from ridge to ridge. The effect on the North Star team was immediate. Security personnel spun toward the sound, raising weapons. Supervisors shouted orders, directing guards to investigate. Attention shifted away from the stone circle toward the surrounding forest, where wolf howls continued to reverberate. "Now," Nate urged, recognizing the opportunity the wolves had created. The three humans emerged from the ravine, moving swiftly across the open ground toward the stone circle. Diana led the way, drawn forward by the pendant's increasingly insistent pulse. The air thickened as they approached, resistance building like moving through water rather than atmosphere. From the forest edge, wolves appeared, first one, then three, then more, racing across the valley floor with supernatural speed. The North Star security team opened fire, but the wolves moved with uncanny awareness, changing directions split seconds before triggers were pulled. The diversion worked perfectly, creating chaos that consumed the operation's full attention. Diana reached the stone circle first, passing between two standing stones that flanked the eastern approach. The transition felt like stepping through an invisible membrane, pressure against her skin, a moment of resistance, then sudden release as she entered the sacred space. Nate and Margaret followed, experiencing the same momentary barrier. Inside the circle, sound dampened dramatically. The gunfire and shouts from outside became distant, muffled. The air itself felt different, heavier with moisture, charged with potential like the moment before lightning strikes. The central stone pulsed with inner light, emerald green matching the pendant's tiny jeweled eyes. "Hurry!" Margaret urged, her voice gaining strength within the circle's embrace. "The ritual must begin before the suppression grid fully activates." Diana approached the central stone, pendant in hand, uncertain yet compelled forward by instinct deeper than thought. The stone stood twice her height, its surface covered with symbols similar to those etched microscopically on the pendant. Up close, she could see that these symbols shifted slightly, rearranging themselves in subtle patterns like living text. "What do I do?" she asked, practical concerns momentarily overriding mystical implications. Margaret positioned herself at the stone's western face, motioning for Nate to take the northern position. "Stand at the southern face," she instructed Diana. "Place the pendant against the stone and open yourself to what comes." Diana obeyed, taking position and pressing the silver wolf pendant against the stone's ancient surface. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Energy surged through the metal into her hand, up her arm, spreading throughout her body like liquid fire. Her vision blurred, reality fracturing into overlapping images. The present stone circle, the same location throughout different eras, guardians who had stood where she now stood across thousands of years. Knowledge flooded into her consciousness, not as organized information, but as intuitive understanding. The nexus was one of several worldwide energy confluences, where the Earth's natural forces concentrated and redistributed. These points maintained balance across vast regions, supporting ecosystems, moderating climate patterns, even influencing human settlements through subtle energetic influences. The stone grew warmer beneath her palm, responding to her presence. Words formed in Diana's mind, not English or any human language, but concepts that translated themselves into sounds her vocal cords could produce. Without conscious decision, she began to speak these words aloud, her voice resonating at frequencies that made the air vibrate visibly around the stones. Margaret and Nate joined, adding their voices to the growing resonance. Though they spoke different phrases, the sounds harmonized perfectly, creating patterns that rippled outward from the circle in concentric waves of energy. The central stone's glow intensified, pulsing in rhythm with their chanted words. Outside the circle, the North Star operation faltered as equipment malfunctioned. Displays flickered, connections failed, carefully calibrated instruments registered impossible readings. The suppression grid, nearly operational, encountered resistance it hadn't been designed to overcome, the Nexus actively defending itself through its human guardians. Through her connection to the pendant, Diana sensed the wolves continuing their distraction, drawing security forces away from the stone circle. Several had been wounded, but none killed. The Alpha's strategy minimized direct confrontation while maximizing disruption. The ritual's energy built toward crescendo, the stone now blazing with emerald light that illuminated the entire circle. Diana felt her personal boundaries dissolving, her consciousness expanding to encompass the forest beyond her physical form. She perceived energy channels throughout the region, some weakened by North Star's suppressors, others still flowing strongly. With newfound awareness, she directed the Nexus energy toward these damaged connections, reinforcing them, re-establishing flow patterns disrupted by technology. As the ritual reached its peak, a new presence made itself known, a consciousness both familiar and strange, human yet more than human. Diana recognized it immediately through some deeper knowing than memory. Mother? The response came not in words, but in feelings, affirmation, love, pride. Alexandra Sullivan's essence remained within the forest consciousness, transformed but present. Through the ritual connection, Diana felt her mother's experience, the confrontation with Kincaid decades ago, the choice to merge with the Nexus rather than allow its capture, the years of watchful presence as part forest, part spirit. In that moment of connection, knowledge transferred from mother to daughter, not just information, but wisdom accumulated through years of integration with the forest consciousness. Diana understood more fully what was at stake, what her role must be, how to complete the ritual that would protect the Nexus from North Star's interference. The final phase required balancing polarities, joining opposing energies to create a reinforced field that would resist technological disruption. Diana extended one hand to Margaret, the other to Nate, completing a circuit around the central stone. Power surged through this human connection, amplified by the stone, radiating outward in expanding waves of green-gold light. The effect manifested beyond the stone circle as a visible aurora-like phenomenon that expanded across the valley, washing over the North Star operation. Where this energy touched the suppression devices, circuits overloaded, components fused, carefully calibrated systems failed catastrophically. The harvesting equipment, designed to capture and redirect Nexus energy, proved particularly vulnerable to this direct application of what it sought to control. Within seconds, the carefully constructed suppression grid collapsed completely. North Star personnel staggered, disoriented by the energy wave. Some dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by sensations beyond normal human perception. Only Harrison Kincaid himself, just arriving at the operations site, seemed capable of comprehending what was happening. Diana saw him through the dissipating energy field, an elegant man in his 60s whose composed exterior couldn't hide the rage and disbelief contorting his features as he witnessed his decades-long quest disintegrating before his eyes. Their gazes met across the distance, recognition flashing between them. In that moment, Diana understood that Kincaid had known exactly who she was from their first meeting, had perhaps been watching her for years, waiting for her to lead him to what her mother had denied him. The ritual concluded with a final pulse of energy that settled into the earth like ripples fading on a pond's surface. Diana's expanded consciousness gradually returned to her physical form, the overwhelming connection receding to manageable levels. She remained changed, awareness heightened, senses attuned to energies most humans never perceived, but once again, distinctly herself. "It's done," Margaret said, her ancient voice filled with satisfaction. "The Nexus is secured for now." Nate nodded, relief evident in his weathered features. "The protective field will prevent technological interference for months, possibly years, long enough for the forest to heal the damage already done." Outside the stone circle, the North Star operation had descended into chaos. Equipment smoked or sparked, technicians frantically tried to salvage data, security personnel appeared disoriented. Only Kincaid maintained his composure, standing amid the destruction with the rigid control of a man whose rage had crystallized into determination. The black alpha wolf appeared at the circle's edge, joined moments later by other pack members. Through the pendant, still warm against her skin, Diana sensed their satisfaction mixed with concern. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the wolf pack had suffered injuries defending the Nexus. More importantly, they recognized that Kincaid would not abandon his quest so easily. "We should leave before they reorganize," Nate advised, watching the North Star teams beginning to regroup. "The ritual was successful, but we're still outnumbered and outgunned." Diana nodded, though reluctance filled her. The stone circle felt like home now, a place of power and belonging. The pendant had connected her to something ancient and vital, awakening abilities she was only beginning to understand. Leaving felt like abandoning a newly discovered part of herself. "The Nexus remains within you now," Margaret said gently, reading her expression. "Distance cannot sever that connection. You carry it wherever you go, just as your mother did." The mention of her mother brought clarity to Diana's thoughts. The ritual had confirmed Alexandra Sullivan's fate, not death as conventionally understood, but transformation, integration with the forest consciousness she had given her life to protect. That knowledge brought both grief and comfort, closure of a kind Diana hadn't realized she needed. They departed the stone circle through its western approach, the black alpha wolf leading them toward a forest path invisible from the valley floor. Other wolves maintained protective positions around them, ensuring their safe withdrawal. Diana glanced back once, seeing Kincaid watching their retreat, his expression unreadable at this distance, but his intent palpable even without mystical perception. This confrontation had ended, but the conflict was far from over. The journey back through the forest passed in contemplative silence. Diana processed the experiences of the past hours, the ritual, the connection to her mother's essence, the awakening of abilities that defied scientific categorization. Her perception of reality had fundamentally shifted, incorporating aspects her academic training had never acknowledged. As they descended toward the lower forest, Nate winced occasionally, pressing his palm against his temple. The after-effects of North Star's suppression technology still caused him discomfort, though with diminishing intensity as distance increased. "Your connection to the Nexus runs deeper than mine," Diana observed. "That's why the suppressors affected you more severely." Nate nodded, his expression thoughtful. 20 years as guardian changes a person. The forest becomes part of you, and you part of it. The integration has benefits and costs. Will that happen to me? Diana asked, uncertain whether to view such transformation as evolution or loss. Your path may be different, Margaret answered. Each guardian serves in their own way. Your mother chose complete integration when confronted with impossible choices. You may find a balance that allows you to maintain your scientific life while honoring your connection to the nexus. The black wolf, leading their small procession, paused at a stream crossing, waiting for them to catch up. Its amber eyes held Diana's for a long moment, communicating without words. The choice remains yours, always. We guide, but do not compel. By late afternoon, they had reached Nate's cabin, physically exhausted, but spiritually invigorated. The wolves dispersed into the surrounding forest, maintaining an invisible perimeter of protection. Only the alpha remained, settling on the porch with the comfortable familiarity of a frequent visitor. Inside, they shared a simple meal prepared from Nate's stored provisions. Diana found herself ravenously hungry, the ritual having depleted her energy reserves more than she'd realized. Food had never tasted so vibrant, flavors intensified by her heightened awareness, each bite connecting her to the sources that had produced it. "What happens now?" she asked finally, the question encompassing far more than immediate plans.
"Kincaid will regroup," Nate replied pragmatically. "Today was a significant setback. Equipment destroyed, data lost, his entire approach proven vulnerable. But a man who has pursued something for 40 years doesn't abandon the quest easily." "He'll adapt his technology," Margaret added, "develop new approaches designed to circumvent the protections we've established. The respite we've gained is temporary, not permanent." Diana considered this sobering assessment. "So we've won a battle, not the war." "The protection of the Nexus has always been an ongoing responsibility," Margaret explained. "Each generation of Guardians faces different challenges. Once it was poachers and loggers. Now it's corporate exploitation with advanced technology. The form changes, but the essential conflict remains the same." The black wolf raised its head from where it rested on the porch, alertness evident in its posture. Through the pendant, Diana sensed its warning moments before Nate tensed, reaching for his rifle. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. Single individual, approaching from the south trail. Diana's hand went to the pendant, focusing her newly enhanced perception. The presence approaching felt familiar, not threatening, but determined. "It's Jake Reynolds," she said with certainty, though she'd never met the man Nate had described as North Star's lead hunter. Nate raised an eyebrow, impressed by her accuracy. "Your sensitivity is developing quickly." Minutes later, a man appeared at the forest edge, tall, weathered, in his mid-50s, dressed in North Star tactical gear, but carrying his weapon pointed downward in a non-threatening position. The black wolf watched him intently, but made no aggressive move. Jake Reynolds raised his empty hand in greeting, stopping at a respectful distance from the cabin. "I come alone," he called. "I need to speak with you, Blackwood. It's important." Nate stepped onto the porch, rifle ready, but not aimed directly at the visitor. "Last I checked, you were cashing North Star paychecks to hunt wolves. Why would I talk to you?" "Because Kincaid has lost his mind," Reynolds replied bluntly. "What I saw today at the Stone Circle—" He shook his head, struggling to articulate the experience. "The energy wave affected everyone differently. Some men collapsed. Others ran in panic. I saw things, memories that weren't mine. The forest speaking." He met Nate's gaze directly. "You know what I mean. It opened something in me I can't close again." Diana joined Nate on the porch, studying the hunter. Through the pendant, she sensed no deception, only genuine confusion and awakening awareness. The Nexus energy had affected him, creating a sensitivity where none had existed before. "The ritual energy can trigger latent connections in receptive individuals," Margaret explained, appearing beside them. "This man has indigenous ancestry, perhaps. The forest recognizes its own." Reynolds looked startled at Margaret's assessment. "My grandmother was Mohawk," he confirmed. But how could you know that? Come inside, Diana invited, making the decision instinctively. I think you have information we need, and we have explanations you're looking for. Over coffee at Nate's rough-hewn table, Reynolds described Kincaid's reaction to the ritual's disruption of his operation. The CEO had been coldly furious, immediately organizing recovery of salvageable equipment and data. More concerning were his new orders, acceleration of what he called Protocol Omega, a contingency plan developed years ago for exactly this situation. He expected resistance from the Nexus, Reynolds explained. Had backup systems and approaches already designed. The primary strategy failed today, but he's implementing alternatives immediately. New equipment is being airlifted from their research facility in Nevada. Teams are being doubled. What's the timeline? Nate asked, his expression grim. 48 hours to operational capability, Reynolds replied. But that's not the worst of it. Kincaid has authorized lethal force against any interference, human or animal. He specifically mentioned you by name, Blackwood. And you, Dr. Sullivan. He knows exactly who you are, what your mother was. Diana felt cold despite the cabin's warmth. He's having us hunted? Reynolds nodded reluctantly. Special teams are being brought in, not regular security, professionals with military background. They've been briefed to consider you dangerous adversaries with unconventional capabilities. Why are you telling us this? Nate asked, suspicion evident in his tone. What changed between this morning and now? The hunter's weathered face reflected internal conflict. I signed on with North Star for the paycheck. Good money for skills I already had. Tracking, hunting, security work. They said it was resource development, energy research. I didn't ask many questions. He stared into his coffee cup. But today, when that energy wave hit, I saw things, felt things. The forest showed me memories, not just mine, but older ones, belonging to the land itself. Margaret nodded, understanding. The awakening. Some experience it gradually, others in sudden revelation. Whatever you call it, I can't unsee it, Reynolds continued. Can't unfeel it. I watched Kincaid afterward, the way he looked at the stone circle, at the forest. There's something wrong in him, something hungry. He doesn't want to study this energy or develop it. He wants to consume it. The black wolf entered through the cabin's half-open door, moving to sit beside Diana's chair. Reynolds tensed momentarily, then relaxed as the animal made no threatening move. The alpha accepts your change of heart, Diana translated, the knowledge coming to her through the pendant's connection, but remains cautious. Reynolds stared at her, then at the wolf. You understand them, like Blackwood does. It's a bit more complicated than that, Diana replied, unwilling to explain fully, despite his apparent conversion. What will you do now? Nate asked the hunter. You can't return to North Star if you're helping us. Reynolds straightened in his chair, decision evident in his posture. I know these mountains almost as well as you do, Blackwood. I know North Star's protocols, their equipment, their personnel. And after today, I know which side I need to stand on. He met each of their gazes in turn. I'm offering to help, if you'll have me. Diana glanced at Nate and Margaret, then at the black wolf, whose judgment she had come to trust implicitly. The alpha's amber eyes conveyed cautious acceptance. This unexpected ally brought valuable knowledge and skills, despite the risk inherent in trusting a former adversary. We need all the help we can get, Diana decided, especially someone who knows Kincaid's operation from the inside. Nate nodded agreement, though wariness remained in his expression. You understand what you're committing to? Kincaid will consider this betrayal. There's no going back. I crossed that line when I walked away from the operation, Reynolds replied grimly. Besides, some choices matter more than careers or paychecks. Today showed me that. As darkness fell outside the cabin windows, they strategized around Nate's table. 4 humans and a wolf planning defense against a corporate army with advanced technology and virtually unlimited resources. The odds seemed impossible, yet Diana felt a strange confidence growing within her. The pendant connected her to something ancient and powerful, something Kincaid, with all his wealth and technology, could never truly understand.
We need to warn the town, she realized suddenly. Silverpine should know what's happening in their forest, the true nature of North Star's operation. Reynolds shook his head doubtfully. Kincaid has spent months cultivating local support, jobs, development, tax revenue. He's promised everything a struggling town wants to hear. Who would believe us over him? Perhaps not everyone, Margaret replied, but some will listen. Seeds planted now may grow when needed most. Outside, wolves howled from distant ridges, sentinels reporting, maintaining their protective network around the cabin. The Black Alpha lifted its head, listening to these communications. Through the pendant, Diana interpreted fragments: North Star regrouping, helicopters arriving, new equipment being assembled. The confrontation had only begun. Tomorrow would bring escalation as Kincaid deployed new resources against the Nexus and its guardians. Diana touched the pendant, drawing reassurance from its steady warmth. Scientific certainty had given way to mystical connection, rational analysis to intuitive knowing. In 2 days, she had transformed from objective researcher to forest guardian, following a path her mother had walked before her. The black wolf's amber eyes met hers across the table, its ancient wisdom flowing through their connection. The greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with understanding. The forest endures. The guardians adapt. The circle continues. Diana nodded, accepting both the wisdom and the responsibility it implied. "Then we'll be ready," she said simply, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even her. The forest beyond the cabin windows rustled in the night breeze, a living entity now fully present in her awareness. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but for tonight, the Nexus was secure, its guardians united in purpose. The pendant pulsed against her skin, a heartbeat shared with the forest itself, reminding her that she stood not alone, but connected to something vast and enduring. In that moment, Diana Sullivan, scientist and daughter, embraced her new identity as guardian, defender of ancient wisdom in a modern world. The path ahead remained uncertain, but her commitment was absolute. Like her mother before her, she had heard the call of the ancient forest and answered with her whole being. Dawn arrived with a crystalline clarity that belied the tension humming through the forest. Diana stood on Nate's porch, watching the first golden rays illuminate the ancient trees. Despite only a few hours of restless sleep, she felt strangely alert, her senses heightened by the pendant's steady warmth against her skin. The forest spoke to her now in a language beyond words: impressions, sensations, awareness of energies flowing through root and branch. The black alpha wolf sat beside her, its powerful presence a silent comfort. Through their connection, Diana sensed its measured concern. Not fear, for the ancient guardian knew the cycle of threat and preservation stretched across centuries, but recognition of the escalating conflict ahead. "They're bringing in specialized equipment," Jake Reynolds said, joining them on the porch. The former North Star hunter had spent the night scouting their perimeter, returning with troubling news. 3 helicopters arrived at their base camp after midnight. Heavy crates, technical teams, additional security personnel with military-grade weapons. "Kincaid isn't wasting time," Diana observed. "He's waited 40 years for this," Reynolds replied grimly. "Today's operation will make yesterday's look like a preliminary test." Nate emerged from the cabin, carrying steaming mugs of coffee. His weathered face showed fatigue, but also resolution, a man who had prepared for this confrontation for 2 decades. "Margaret contacted the tribal council. They're sending representatives to meet us in Silverpine this morning." Diana accepted a mug gratefully, the strong coffee a welcome anchor to ordinary reality after hours immersed in mystical perception. How can the tribal council help? North Star has government permits, corporate lawyers, armed security. "They have something more powerful," Margaret said, appearing in the doorway with surprising silence for a woman of her years. "Legal standing. The Nexus sits on disputed territory, land that was never properly ceded in any treaty. The tribal nation has filed claims for decades." Reynolds looked skeptical. "Legal challenges take years. Kincaid will have stripped the Nexus of its energy long before any court ruling." "The legal challenge is just one front in this battle," Margaret replied with ancient patience. "We fight on many levels simultaneously: physical, legal, spiritual, and within the hearts and minds of the community." The black wolf rose suddenly, attention fixed on the forest to the east. Diana felt its alert ripple through her consciousness. Something approached, not threatening, but significant. Within moments, a pure white wolf emerged from the trees, its form seeming to shimmer slightly in the early light, emerald eyes fixed on Diana. "Mother," she whispered, recognizing the essence that had touched her during the ritual. The others fell silent, witnessing the connection between mother and daughter that transcended conventional boundaries between life and death. The white wolf approached Diana directly, stopping just before her. Through the pendant, emotions flowed: love, pride, urgency, and knowledge beyond human words. Diana knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the spectral creature. "You're trying to tell me something. Something about Kincaid." The white wolf's emerald gaze intensified. Images cascaded through Diana's mind. Harrison Kincaid as a younger man, exploring these same forests with his father decades ago. Alexandra Sullivan confronting him at the stone circle. Kincaid's growing obsession with the Nexus energy, driven by something darker than mere corporate greed. "He's not just after energy or resources," Diana said slowly, interpreting the fragmentary visions. "There's something personal in this for him, almost religious." The white wolf nodded, a disturbingly human gesture that confirmed Diana's understanding. "His father believed the Nexus energy could grant extended life," she continued, knowledge unfolding through their connection. "Possibly immortality. Kincaid inherited that belief, expanded on it. He thinks controlling the Nexus means controlling death itself. That explains his lifelong obsession," Nate said quietly, "and why conventional opposition hasn't deterred him." The white wolf turned, looking toward Silverpine with clear intention. Message delivered, it melted back into the forest, form fading until only a shimmer of morning mist marked its passing. The black alpha watched it go with ancient understanding, then turned expectantly to the humans. Diana straightened, newfound resolve hardening within her. "We need to go to town, not just to meet the tribal representatives, but to make our case directly to the people of Silverpine. If Kincaid's motivations are as personal and extreme as my mother suggests, the community deserves to know what's happening in their backyard." "Convincing skeptics won't be easy," Reynolds warned. "These people need jobs more than they need mystical forests." "Then we present both spiritual and practical arguments," Diana replied. "The Nexus maintains ecological balance throughout the region. Disrupt it, and they'll face consequences from flooding to crop failures. Their economic future depends on a healthy ecosystem, not short-term resource extraction." Margaret nodded approval. "Balance in all things. Address both heart and mind." They prepared quickly, gathering what they would need for the confrontation ahead. Diana collected research data on her laptop that demonstrated unusual ecological patterns centered around the Nexus, information that might help convince scientifically minded skeptics. Nate selected weapons for defense, though they all recognized that firepower alone wouldn't prevail against North Star's resources. Reynolds provided crucial intelligence, patrol patterns, communication protocols, vulnerabilities in Kincaid's security network. His insider knowledge would prove invaluable as the conflict intensified. Before departing, Diana knelt once more beside the Black Alpha. "You understand what we're attempting?" The ancient wolf's amber eyes conveyed complete comprehension. Through their connection, she felt its response. "The pack will maintain surveillance of North Star's activities while you engage the human community. Some battles belong to two-legged guardians." "Be careful," Diana said, running her fingers through the thick fur at the wolf's neck. "Kincaid's men are armed with those silver composite rounds." The Alpha's confidence flowed through their connection. Wisdom accumulated across an unnaturally long life. The pack had survived centuries of human threats. They would navigate this one as well. They departed in two vehicles, Diana and Margaret in Diana's Subaru, Nate and Reynolds following in Nate's ancient but reliable truck.
The drive to Silverpine took them along forest roads increasingly monitored by North Star personnel. Twice they passed company vehicles heading toward the base camp, loaded with equipment and stern-faced security teams. "They're escalating faster than expected," Reynolds observed grimly after a particularly heavily armed convoy passed. "Those weren't regular security guards. Those were mercenaries, ex-military specialists." The town of Silverpine appeared unchanged on the surface, the same small collection of buildings nestled at the forest's edge, seemingly untouched by the mystical conflict unfolding in the mountains above. Yet Diana sensed a subtle difference in the atmosphere, an undercurrent of tension evident in residents' faces as they walked the main street. They parked near the community center, where a small gathering had already formed. 3 representatives from the tribal council stood in conversation with the town mayor, whose uncomfortable expressions suggested the discussion wasn't proceeding smoothly. Nearby, a North Star public relations team had set up an information booth, distributing glossy brochures about economic development and environmental stewardship. "Kincaid is covering all bases," Nate observed, "public relations simultaneously with military escalation." Diana touched the pendant beneath her shirt, drawing strength from its steady warmth. "Let's start with the tribal representatives. Their legal challenge gives us legitimate standing." As they approached the small group, Diana recognized the tension in the mayor's posture, a man caught between competing interests with his town's economic future hanging in the balance. The tribal representatives, 2 men and a woman in professional attire, maintained composed expressions despite the evident difficulty of their conversation. "Dr. Sullivan," the mayor acknowledged, relief flickering across his face at the interruption, "and Ms. Clearwater. I understand you've been consulting with the tribal council regarding North Star's activities." "More than consulting," Margaret replied with quiet dignity. "We are aligned in purpose, protection of sacred land that sustains this entire region." The female tribal representative extended her hand to Diana. "Julia Redbird, legal counsel for the tribal nation. Margaret has told us about your connection to the forest, about your mother." Diana accepted the handshake, feeling an immediate kinship with this professional woman who balanced modern legal expertise with evident respect for traditional knowledge. "My connection is recent, but growing stronger. I've seen what's at stake." "What's at stake is the economic future of Silverpine," the mayor interjected, gesturing toward the North Star information booth where several townspeople had gathered. "These people need jobs, stability. North Star offers both." "At what cost?" Diana countered gently. "I'm a scientist, Mayor, not just a spiritual seeker. My ecological research demonstrates that something unique exists in these forests, something that maintains balance throughout the watershed. Disrupt it, and the consequences won't be limited to mystical concerns. You'll face practical problems, altered rainfall patterns, soil degradation, changes to wildlife migration that affect hunting and tourism." Before the mayor could respond, commotion erupted at the town's main entrance. 3 black SUVs with North Star logos pulled into the street, coming to a precise stop in formation. From the central vehicle emerged Harrison Kincaid himself, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that projected corporate authority. He was accompanied by an entourage of assistants and security personnel who maintained professional smiles despite alert postures. "It appears the confrontation comes to us," Margaret observed quietly. Kincaid approached with practiced confidence, his silver hair and tanned face creating the image of distinguished leadership. Only his eyes betrayed something harder, the driven intensity Diana had glimpsed during their brief encounter at the town meeting. "Mayor Wilson, good morning," Kincaid greeted warmly, shaking the local official's hand. "I see you're already speaking with our friends from the tribal council." His smile remained fixed as he acknowledged the indigenous representatives with a nod that stopped short of respect. "And Dr. Sullivan, I've been hoping for an opportunity to continue our conversation." Diana met his gaze directly, the pendant warm against her skin. Through her enhanced perception, she sensed the darkness within him, not evil in any simplistic sense, but a profound imbalance, a hunger that had consumed whatever better nature he might once have possessed.
"Mr. Kincaid," she replied with professional courtesy, "I believe we have significantly different perspectives on forest management and resource utilization." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Different perspectives make for productive dialogue, Doctor. Perhaps we could discuss your concerns privately. Corporate resources combined with scientific insight often yield innovative solutions." "I think this conversation belongs to the community," Diana countered, gesturing to the townspeople who had begun to gather, drawn by the arrival of the North Star convoy. "Your operation affects everyone in this region." Kincaid's expression remained pleasant, though his eyes hardened. "Of course, transparency has always been North Star's policy." He turned toward the gathering crowd with the practiced ease of a politician. "Friends, neighbors, I'm here today to address concerns and share exciting developments in our regional initiative." More residents emerged from shops and homes, drawn by the commotion. Within minutes, most of Silver Pine's small population had assembled in the town square. Farmers, shopkeepers, retirees, families with children. Diana recognized faces from her brief time in town: the motel owner, the bartender, curious locals who had eyed her research equipment with skepticism. Kincaid commanded attention effortlessly, his deep voice projecting authority and reassurance. "North Star Resources is committed to responsible development that benefits local communities. Our project will create over 200 jobs directly, with additional economic benefits throughout the supply chain." He continued with practiced phrases about environmental stewardship and sustainable practices, painting a picture of corporate responsibility that bore little resemblance to the armed security forces and disruptive technology Diana had witnessed in the forest. "What Mr. Kincaid isn't telling you," Diana said when he paused for breath, stepping forward to address the crowd directly, "is the true nature of what exists in your forest. The unique energy nexus they're attempting to harvest maintains ecological balance throughout this entire watershed. Disrupting it will have consequences far beyond the immediate extraction zone." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kincaid's smile remained fixed, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Dr. Sullivan is a respected ecologist," he acknowledged smoothly, "but her recent experiences have led her toward interpretations that fall outside conventional science. Our environmental impact studies, conducted by multiple independent consultancies, show minimal disruption to local ecosystems." "Those studies didn't account for the energy field centered at the stone circle," Diana countered. "How could they? Your scientists probably don't even believe it exists." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter passed through the crowd. Diana recognized her mistake immediately. Appealing to mystical energy fields wouldn't convince this practical community dependent on logging, farming, and increasingly, tourism. She adjusted her approach. "I'm talking about measurable phenomena," she clarified. "Unusual magnetic readings, statistically significant patterns in plant growth and animal migration, hydrological anomalies that affect everything from crop yields to flood cycles. These effects extend throughout the region, but originate at the site North Star is targeting for extraction." Julia Redbird stepped forward, adding legal weight to Diana's scientific argument. "The tribal nation has documented these patterns for generations. Our challenge to North Star's permits rests on both traditional knowledge and contemporary environmental regulations." Kincaid's pleasant mask slipped momentarily, revealing the driven intensity beneath. "Progress always faces resistance from those who fear change. The tribal nation has opposed every development project in the region for decades. It's practically institutional policy." He turned to the townspeople, appealing directly to economic self-interest. "Meanwhile, young people leave Silver Pine because there are no opportunities. Businesses close. The community withers." His words struck home. Diana saw heads nodding, expressions hardening. These were people who had watched their community decline as traditional industries disappeared, who worried about their children's futures more than abstract ecological balance. Margaret Clearwater stepped forward, her elderly frame somehow commanding attention despite Kincaid's polished presence. "I have lived 87 years in these mountains," she began, her voice carrying surprising strength. "I have seen corporations come and go, each promising prosperity, each leaving the land poorer than they found it. The crowd quieted, respecting both her age and her lifelong connection to the region. "The forest has provided for my people since time beyond memory," she continued, "not through extraction, but through relationship, taking what we need while maintaining balance. The place North Star targets is sacred not because of superstition, but because it is vital. Like the heart in a body, it circulates life throughout the whole." She turned to Kincaid, fixing him with a penetrating gaze that made him visibly uncomfortable despite his corporate armor. "Harrison Kincaid does not seek resources for your benefit. He seeks power for himself, power he believes will conquer even death. Ask him about his father's obsession. Ask him about the true purpose of his lifetime search." Kincaid's composure fractured, genuine anger flashing across his features before he regained control. "Ms. Clearwater's imagination makes for colorful storytelling, but has no place in serious discussion about regional development." "Then explain the specialized weapons your security forces carry," Nate challenged, speaking for the first time. "Explain the technology designed not to extract mineral resources, but to capture energy your own scientists claim doesn't exist." Reynolds stepped forward, his North Star tactical gear drawing startled attention. "I led Kincaid's security operations until yesterday. What I witnessed in the forest changed everything." He addressed the townspeople directly. "I'm a practical man, never believed in spirits or energy fields. But what's happening up there isn't about mining or timber or any resource you'd recognize. It's about power, the kind no human was meant to control." Murmurs rippled through the crowd again, uncertainty replacing the earlier skepticism. Kincaid's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling as too many credible voices challenged it simultaneously. "Jacob Reynolds was terminated yesterday for unstable behavior and protocol violations," Kincaid stated coldly. "His current statements reflect personal grievances rather than operational reality." "Then open your base camp to independent inspection," Diana suggested. "Let community representatives see the equipment you're deploying. Explain the sonic disruptors that affect wildlife behavior, the specialized rounds your security forces carry, the quantum entanglement devices designed to harvest energy." Kincaid's expression hardened completely, the affable corporate mask discarded. "Our operations involve proprietary technology protected under numerous patents and security classifications. Corporate espionage is a genuine concern in our industry." "Convenient," Nate observed dryly. A middle-aged woman in farming clothes spoke up from the crowd. "My family has worked in this land for 5 generations. Last 3 years, we've seen changes. Weather patterns shifting, springs drying up, wildlife behaving strangely. Started around when North Star began their preliminary surveys. That connection real or coincidence?" "Absolutely connected," Diana confirmed. "The energy nexus maintains hydrological balance throughout the watershed. Even North Star's initial testing has disrupted patterns that remained stable for centuries." More voices joined the discussion. A hunting guide who reported unusual wildlife migration, an older man who described failing crops in previously fertile areas, a young mother concerned about unexplained electronic malfunctions throughout town whenever North Star conducted testing in the mountains. Kincaid's expression grew increasingly stony as community sentiment shifted. The mayor watched this transformation with evident concern, his political calculations visibly adjusting to the changing winds of public opinion. "These anecdotal reports, while concerning, don't establish causation," Kincaid stated finally, his tone clipped. "North Star has all necessary permits and authorizations to proceed with our operation. While we value community input, the regulatory requirements have been satisfied." "Not all of them," Julia Redbird interjected, producing legal documents from her briefcase. "This injunction, filed this morning and already granted by Federal Judge Williamson, temporarily halts all North Star operations pending environmental and cultural heritage review." She handed copies to both Kincaid and Mayor Wilson. Judge Williamson was particularly concerned by evidence suggesting potential violations of the National Historic Preservation Act, given the stone formation's archaeological significance. Kincaid accepted the document with rigid control, though Diana sensed the fury radiating from him, a cold, focused rage that transcended ordinary corporate disappointment. This wasn't merely a business setback for him. It was a personal defeat in a quest that had consumed his entire adult life. "My legal team will address this immediately," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Temporary injunctions based on speculative claims are routinely overturned. Our operation will proceed after a brief delay, during which all equipment must remain inactive and security personnel must stand down," Julia reminded him pointedly. "Any violation will constitute contempt of court." The confrontation had reached stalemate. Kincaid couldn't proceed legally, but neither had he abandoned his intentions. The crowd began to disperse, conversations continuing in smaller groups as townspeople processed the conflicting information and unexpected drama. Diana watched Kincaid retreat to his vehicle, flanked by security personnel. Through the pendant's heightened perception, she sensed the calculations already forming in his mind: alternatives, contingencies, options that existed outside legal frameworks. The injunction had won them time, but not resolution. "He won't stop," she said quietly to Nate and Margaret as they regrouped away from the dispersing crowd. "Legal barriers mean nothing when someone believes they're pursuing immortality. The injunction buys us days, perhaps weeks," Julia Redbird acknowledged, joining their conversation. "But eventually, courts will require physical evidence of the Nexus's significance beyond cultural claims." "Evidence exists," Nate assured her, "but convincing scientists and courts to accept it presents challenges." "Then we use this time wisely," Margaret decided. "The forest has awakened Diana's abilities quickly for good reason. The ritual yesterday was just the beginning. There are deeper connections to establish, stronger protections to create." Diana felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders, not just from her human allies but from the forest itself. The pendant pulsed with gentle warmth, reminding her of her unique position in this unfolding conflict. Science had brought her to Silverpine, but something far older would determine her path forward. "What happens now?" she asked Margaret, whose ancient wisdom suddenly seemed the most reliable guide. "We return to the Nexus," the elderly woman replied simply. "You must complete the connection your mother began decades ago, not by surrendering your humanity as she did, but by bridging worlds." The sky darkened suddenly, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. Diana sensed disturbance rippling through the forest's energy field. Not the suppression grid this time, but something equally concerning. The pendant turned cold against her skin. "Kincaid isn't waiting for legal resolution," Reynolds realized, looking toward the mountains where clouds concentrated with improbable density. "They're activating something now, something different from yesterday's technology." "We need to return to the forest immediately," Diana urged, already moving toward her vehicle. They departed Silverpine with urgency, Diana and Margaret once again in the Subaru, with Nate and Reynolds following in the truck. As they drove toward the forest roads, Diana observed North Star vehicles converging from multiple directions. Not just security teams now, but technical personnel and equipment transporters, all moving with coordinated purpose despite the legal injunction. "He's gambling everything on one operation," Reynolds noted grimly after a particularly heavily laden convoy passed them heading toward the base camp. "Risking criminal charges, corporate reputation, everything. Because he believes the reward transcends all worldly consequences," Margaret replied. "A man who thinks he's pursuing immortality fears neither prison nor financial ruin." The forest roads grew treacherous as they ascended toward the Nexus, the unnatural storm intensifying. Wind lashed the ancient trees, rain fell in blinding sheets, and occasional lightning illuminated the darkened landscape with stroboscopic effect. Yet Diana sensed this wasn't entirely natural weather. Something about the storm's electromagnetic signature felt manufactured, targeted. "He's using the weather itself as a weapon," she realized aloud. "Some kind of atmospheric manipulation technology." "Kincaid's company holds patents on cloud seeding and localized weather modification," Reynolds confirmed, "originally developed for agricultural applications, supposedly." They were forced to abandon the vehicles 3 miles from their destination, the road ahead blocked by fallen trees that couldn't possibly be coincidental. Diana shouldered her backpack, the pendant now painfully cold against her skin as they continued on foot. The forest's distress communicated itself through every sense, trees groaning in abnormal winds, wildlife fleeing in confused patterns, the very air charged with wrongness. The black alpha wolf found them halfway to the nexus, emerging from the storm-lashed forest with urgent purpose. Other pack members appeared briefly before vanishing again, scouts reporting, sentinels guiding. Through her connection to the pendant, Diana understood their communications with increasing clarity. North Star forces had surrounded the stone circle, deploying equipment even as the injunction was being served in town. Kincaid himself had arrived by helicopter, overseeing the operation with maniacal intensity. "They're attempting something different," Diana translated for the others as they sheltered momentarily beneath a rocky overhang. "Not suppression this time. Active extraction. They're trying to establish a direct conduit between the Nexus and some kind of containment system." Nate's expression darkened with concern. "That would be catastrophically destabilizing. The Nexus energy isn't meant to be concentrated or contained. It flows through natural channels throughout the region." "Precisely why Kincaid created this storm," Margaret added, her ancient eyes watching the unnatural lightning with understanding. "He's using atmospheric disturbance to mask the energetic disruption his equipment causes. The forest can't distinguish natural chaos from artificial interference." They pressed onward through the worsening storm, following the wolves' guidance along hidden paths that avoided North Star patrols. The pendant grew colder still, an icy presence against Diana's skin that warned of increasing danger. Yet simultaneously, something deeper awakened within her. A connection to the forest that transcended the physical talisman, a resonance with the nexus that felt increasingly like coming home. As they neared the valley containing the stone circle, the storm's unnatural character became undeniable. Lightning struck repeatedly in precise patterns, creating an electromagnetic cage around the nexus. Within this perimeter, North Star personnel worked with frantic efficiency, assembling equipment far more substantial than the previous day's technology. At the center stood a device resembling a quantum computer surrounded by concentric rings of specialized receivers, all aimed at the stone circle. "Quantum entanglement on a massive scale," Reynolds whispered as they observed from concealed positions, designed to capture and transfer energy patterns without physical connection. "Theoretical technology I heard researchers discussing. Never thought they'd actually built it." Diana focused on the stone circle itself, using the pendant's connection to assess the Nexus's condition. What she sensed alarmed her deeply. The ancient energy patterns were destabilizing, pulled toward Kincaid's machinery in ways that distorted the natural flow. The protective field they had established through ritual was weakening under this direct assault. "The containment system is failing," she reported urgently. "They can't control what they're extracting. The energy isn't behaving as they expected." Even as she spoke, alarms sounded throughout the North Star operation. Technicians shouted warnings, equipment sparked with uncontrolled power surges, and the unnatural lightning intensified. At the center of this chaos stood Harrison Kincaid, his expression transfixed with obsessive determination as he ordered adjustments and ignored safety protocols. "He's losing control but won't shut down," Reynolds said. "This could become catastrophic quickly." "Not could, will," Margaret corrected grimly. "The Nexus energy responds to harmony and balance. Forced extraction creates dissonance that will amplify until something breaks, either Kincaid's machinery or the Nexus itself." "And if the Nexus breaks?" Diana asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Ecological collapse throughout the watershed," Nate replied, followed by cascading failures that could extend far beyond this region. The Nexus doesn't just maintain local balance, it's part of a global network of similar energy confluences. The responsibility settled on Diana with crystalline clarity. She alone stood in a unique position, scientifically trained, yet mystically connected, descended from guardians, yet still firmly rooted in contemporary understanding.
The pendant had chosen her for precisely this moment. I need to enter the circle, she decided. Re-establish proper flow patterns before the disruption becomes irreversible. North Star has armed personnel surrounding the entire perimeter, Reynolds objected. You wouldn't get within 50 yards before being intercepted. Then we need a diversion, Nate said, his weathered face set with determination. Something significant enough to draw their attention away from the western approach. The black alpha wolf, crouched beside them in their sheltered observation point, conveyed understanding through the pendant's connection. The pack would provide the necessary diversion, approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. They understood the risk posed by the specialized weapons, but accepted it as part of their ancient duty. No, Diana protested, unwilling to sacrifice these magnificent creatures to Kincaid's security forces. There must be another way. I have something that might help, Reynolds said unexpectedly, opening his pack to reveal several small devices. Sonic disruptors, North Star technology designed to affect electronics rather than wildlife. Plant these at intervals around the eastern perimeter, and their communications will fail precisely when the wolves appear from the north and south. The plan came together quickly. Nate and Reynolds would deploy the sonic disruptors, creating electronic interference that would hamper North Star's coordination. The wolves would then approach from multiple directions, drawing security forces away from their positions. In the resulting confusion, Diana and Margaret would approach the stone circle from the west, using the steepest and most difficult terrain that North Star had left relatively unguarded. Once I reach the circle, what exactly am I supposed to do? Diana asked Margaret as they prepared to separate. The elderly woman's ancient eyes held both wisdom and compassion. The knowledge will come when needed. The nexus will guide you, as will your mother's spirit. Trust what you feel more than what you think. They separated with minimal farewells, each understanding the stakes transcended personal concerns. Diana watched Nate and Reynolds disappear into the storm-lashed forest, the black alpha leading its pack in a different direction. Only Margaret remained beside her, unexpectedly spry despite her advanced years as they began circling toward the western approach. You've done this before, Diana realized, as they navigated challenging terrain with surprising efficiency. You're not just a storyteller or tribal elder. Margaret's smile held ancient secrets. I was guardian before Nathaniel, though in a different capacity. Each serves according to their gifts. Mine was knowledge preservation, rather than direct action. And mine? Diana asked, the question encompassing far more than her immediate role. You bridge worlds, Margaret replied simply. Science and spirit, human and forest, past and future. Alexandra saw possibilities, but chose integration over bridging. You have the opportunity to create something new. Balance without surrender. They reached the western ridge overlooking the stone circle, just as chaos erupted on the opposite side of the valley. The sonic disruptors activated simultaneously, creating an electronic dead zone that silenced North Star's communications. Seconds later, wolves appeared at multiple points along the perimeter, drawing security personnel away from their stations. The diversion worked perfectly, creating a brief window of opportunity. Diana and Margaret descended swiftly, using the storm's intensity as additional cover. The pendant grew painfully cold against Diana's skin as they approached the stone circle, warning of the dangerous energy distortions Kincaid's equipment had created. Yet beneath this cold burned something deeper, a resonance with the nexus itself, calling her forward with increasing urgency. They reached the circle's edge undetected, pausing behind the westernmost standing stones. From this position, Diana could see the full extent of North Star's operation. The quantum extraction device at the center, Harrison Kincaid himself monitoring readings with obsessive intensity, technicians struggling to contain energy fluctuations that manifested as arcs of green-gold lightning between the ancient stones. Their containment is failing, Diana whispered, understanding the readings on their monitors through her scientific training. The energy patterns are too complex, too alive for their technology to capture. Yet they continue, Margaret observed grimly, driven by Kincaid's obsession rather than rational assessment. Diana touched the pendant, focusing her awareness on the nexus itself rather than the technology attempting to harness it. What she perceived alarmed her deeply. The natural energy patterns were unraveling, ancient flows disrupted in ways that rippled outward through the forest and beyond. The damage was approaching a tipping point where natural rebalancing would become impossible. "I need to reach the center stone," she decided, studying the chaos within the circle. North Star personnel focused entirely on their failing equipment, creating a potential path between their positions. "Go," Margaret urged. "I will maintain connection from here, supporting the ritual as I did yesterday." Diana removed the pendant from around her neck, holding it tightly in her palm, where its icy warning pressed against her skin. Then she slipped between the westernmost stones, entering the circle with determined purpose. The transition felt different from her previous entry, the invisible membrane now turbulent, distorted by Kincaid's extraction attempt. Energy patterns swirled chaotically around her, visible as distortions in the air like heat mirages, intensified 100-fold. Yet Diana moved with increasing confidence, instinctively finding pathways through the disruption, her body responding to guidance that transcended conscious thought. She was halfway to the center when a technician spotted her, shouting an alarm that cut through even the storm's tumult. Security personnel turned toward the unexpected intrusion, weapons raised. Diana froze momentarily, exposed and vulnerable in the open space between North Star's equipment arrays. Then something extraordinary happened. The white wolf appeared beside her, not physically present as the black alpha and its pack, but manifest enough to be visible to everyone within the circle. Its spectral form glowed with emerald light, creating a protective aura that surrounded Diana as she continued forward. Kincaid himself saw the manifestation, his expression transforming from surprise to vindictive recognition. "Sullivan," he hissed, abandoning his monitoring station to intercept her personally. "Like mother, like daughter, interfering with forces you can't possibly understand." "I understand more than you think," Diana replied, continuing her advance toward the center stone. "Including what this energy really is, and why it can never give you what you want." "Immortality isn't just what I want," Kincaid responded, his voice carrying the fervor of lifelong obsession. "It's what this energy offers to those with courage to claim it. Your mother knew that. She simply lacked vision. She integrated with the forest consciousness, becoming something less than human. I will control it, becoming something more." Security personnel surrounded them, weapons trained on Diana, but hesitant to fire with their CEO in close proximity. The white wolf's protective aura pulsed brighter, keeping them at bay through means beyond physical intimidation. "The Nexus isn't a resource to extract or control," Diana explained, hoping rational argument might penetrate his obsession. "It's a living system that maintains balance. What you're attempting is like removing a patient's heart to study it. The knowledge gained costs the very life you sought to understand." Kincaid's expression hardened with contempt. "Poetic metaphors from another Sullivan. Your mother spoke similarly before she chose forest spirits over human progress. But North Star has advanced beyond philosophical limitations. Our technology can contain and redirect this energy without destroying its source." As if contradicting his confident assertion, the quantum extraction device behind him sparked violently, emergency alarms blaring as technicians scrambled to contain cascading failures. The energy distortions intensified visibly, stone circle and extraction equipment alike shimmering with increasing instability. "Your containment is failing," Diana stated, cold certainty in her voice. "Not because your technology is flawed, but because you're attempting something fundamentally impossible. The Nexus energy exists to flow and connect, not to be concentrated or possessed. What flows can nourish. What's contained will either die or explode." Kincaid's composure fractured, obsession overwhelming corporate control. "Then we'll adapt. Redirect. My father spent 30 years developing the theoretical framework. I've spent 40 more perfecting it. The answer exists. It must." "Not through technology," Diana replied with surprising compassion.
understanding Kincaid fully now, not a corporate villain, but a man driven by the most human of fears, pursuing immortality through increasingly destructive means. The Nexus offers extension, not exemption. Your father misunderstood what Alexandra Sullivan discovered. She found the key, Kincaid insisted, desperation entering his voice as equipment failures intensified around them. She merged with the forest consciousness, achieving a form of continued existence. But surrender isn't necessary. Control is possible. Diana shook her head, the pendant now warming in her palm, as she approached the center stone. The white wolf, her mother's essence, moved beside her, emerald eyes fixed on Kincaid with ancient understanding rather than anger. She didn't surrender to escape death, Diana explained gently. She joined with something larger because she recognized her place within it. There's a difference between fearing an ending and embracing a continuation. Before Kincaid could respond, catastrophic failure engulfed the quantum extraction device. Contained energy burst free in blinding arcs, technicians abandoning their stations as equipment exploded in cascading system failures. Security personnel retreated from the intensifying danger, leaving only Kincaid himself standing before Diana, refusing to abandon his lifelong quest even as it collapsed around him. "You've destroyed everything," he accused, genuine anguish breaking through his controlled exterior. "No," Diana corrected, reaching the center stone with the pendant held before her. "I'm going to save what remains." She pressed the silver wolf against the stone's ancient surface, completing the connection that had begun with her first visit to the Nexus. Energy surged through the pendant into her body, no longer painfully cold, but gloriously alive. Consciousness expanding beyond physical limitations, awareness encompassing the entire forest and beyond. Diana perceived the full extent of damage Kincaid's extraction attempt had caused. Energy channels disrupted throughout the region, natural flows diverted and distorted, ecological systems already responding with instability. Yet she also sensed the inherent resilience of the Nexus, its ancient patterns struggling to reassert themselves despite technological interference. Knowledge flowed into her consciousness, not as organized information, but as intuitive understanding. The ritual required to heal these disruptions unfolded in her awareness, actions and words arising from somewhere beyond conscious thought. Diana began the incantation, her voice resonating at frequencies that made the air vibrate visibly around the standing stones. Margaret joined from the circle's edge, adding her ancient voice to Diana's modern one. The harmony they created transcended human language, connecting directly with the forest's consciousness in patterns older than civilization. The center stone responded, its emerald glow intensifying with each phrase of the healing ritual. Kincaid watched in fascinated horror as the energy he had sought to capture responded to voices rather than technology. "That's not possible," he whispered, scientific certainty crumbling before mystical reality. Energy follows physical laws, not songs. Yet the evidence manifested undeniably around him. The chaotic energy patterns began realigning, distortions smoothing as natural flows reestablished themselves. The standing stones resonated in harmony with Diana and Margaret's voices, creating a stabilizing field that spread outward from the circle. Outside the perimeter, the unnatural storm began to dissipate. Lightning ceased, winds calmed, and sunlight broke through dissolving clouds. North Star personnel retreated to safety positions, abandoning equipment that now sparked and smoked with terminal failure. Only Kincaid remained, watching his life's work disintegrate before his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the hollow resignation of a zealot confronting the collapse of fundamental beliefs. "All these years, was I simply wrong? Is control truly impossible?" Diana paused in the ritual long enough to address him directly, compassion rather than triumph in her expression. "Not wrong about the energy's potential, wrong about humanity's relationship to it. Connection, not containment, offers the continuation you seek." The white wolf approached Kincaid, its spectral form shimmering with emerald light. Though Diana knew this manifestation represented her mother's essence, she recognized something larger behind it. The forest consciousness itself, offering choice rather than judgment. "You still have options," Diana told him quietly. "Even now, the Nexus offers balance to those who seek it properly. Not immortality as you imagined it, but connection that extends beyond individual limitations." For a moment, something shifted in Kincaid's expression, a glimpse of the curious scientist he might have been before obsession consumed him. The white wolf stood before him, emerald eyes meeting his in silent communication. Whatever passed between them remained private, but when the moment ended, something fundamental had changed in Harrison Kincaid. "I need time," he said finally, shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "Time to reconsider everything." "Time is something the forest offers freely," Diana replied, returning to the ritual with Margaret's ancient voice joining hers once more. As Kincaid departed, walking alone toward the stone circle's edge, the healing continued. Diana felt the Nexus responding to their combined efforts, damaged connections regenerating, disrupted flows re-establishing natural patterns. The pendant grew warm against the central stone, pulsing with living energy that spread outward through earth and air, tree and stone. Nate and Reynolds appeared at the circle's perimeter, accompanied by the black alpha wolf whose amber eyes shone with ancient satisfaction. The North Star operation had collapsed completely, equipment abandoned, personnel retreating toward their base camp, the immediate threat neutralized through technological failure rather than direct confrontation. When the ritual finally concluded, Diana found herself changed in ways that defied simple categorization. Her awareness had expanded permanently, perception encompassing energies and connections invisible to conventional human senses. Yet unlike her mother, she maintained distinct individuality, connected to the forest consciousness without surrendering her separate existence. "The balance returns," Margaret said with quiet satisfaction, her ancient eyes evaluating Diana with approval. "And a new guardian takes her place in the ancient cycle. Not exactly like those who came before," Diana noted, feeling both the connection and the distinction that defined her unique position. "Each guardian serves according to their nature," Margaret replied. "Your mother joined fully with the forest consciousness because her scientific mind needed complete immersion to accept what transcended rational understanding. You bridge worlds differently, maintaining scientific perspective while embracing mystical connection." The white wolf appeared once more, approaching Diana with evident purpose. Through their connection, emotions flowed: approval, love, and something more complex: release. Alexandra Sullivan's essence had completed its primary purpose, guiding her daughter to assume the guardian role. While she would remain part of the forest consciousness, her distinct manifestation would gradually fade as natural integration continued. "I understand," Diana told her mother's spirit, grief and gratitude mingling in her heart. "You're not leaving, just becoming more fully what you already are." The white wolf nodded, then turned toward the forest's depth, pausing once to look back before disappearing among the ancient trees. The black alpha remained, now clearly Diana's primary connection to the wolf pack that had guarded the Nexus for countless generations. "What about Kincaid?" Reynolds asked, watching the CEO's solitary figure retreating down the valley toward the base camp. "He doesn't strike me as someone who surrenders easily." "He's not surrendering," Diana replied, understanding more than she could easily explain. "He's reassessing. The Nexus offered him something he never considered, participation rather than ownership. Whether he ultimately accepts that offer remains his choice." "And North Star resources?" Nate inquired, practical concerns returning as the immediate crisis passed. "The legal challenges will proceed," Diana said with certainty. "Julia Redbird and the Tribal Council have strong cases under multiple environmental and cultural heritage statutes. Corporate resources can delay, but not ultimately prevent protection for this sacred place." The standing stones still hummed with subtle energy, but stability had returned to the Nexus. Natural patterns flowed through ancient channels, maintaining the ecological balance that extended throughout the region. Diana felt these connections with newfound clarity, not just conceptually, but experientially. Her consciousness expanded to perceive the living network of which she had become an integral part. "And your research?" Margaret asked gently, recognizing the crossroads Diana had reached. "Your academic career?" Diana smiled, touching the pendant that had transformed her understanding of both science and spirituality. "Science needs bridges to wisdom traditions, not just to technology. I'll continue my research, but with deeper purpose, documenting the ecological significance of places like the Nexus, creating frameworks that integrate indigenous knowledge with scientific methodology." The black alpha wolf rose, indicating it was time to depart. The stone circle had been protected, the immediate threat neutralized, but ongoing guardianship would require vigilance and adaptation. Diana understood without words. Her commitment extended beyond this single confrontation to a lifetime of balanced protection. As they departed the valley, leaving the ancient stones standing as they had for thousands of years, Diana felt the forest's consciousness flowing through and around her, not possessing her as she had feared, not diminishing her humanity, but expanding it, connecting individual awareness to something vastly larger without dissolving personal identity. The pendant rested warm against her skin, no longer a separate talisman, but an integrated extension of her own being. The scientific researcher who had arrived in Silverpine seeking wolf behavior data had discovered something far more significant, a bridge between worlds too often separated by artificial boundaries. Overhead, natural sunlight broke fully through the dissolving clouds, illuminating the ancient forest with golden radiance. Diana felt her mother's essence dispersed throughout this living tapestry, not gone, but transformed, participating in cycles of renewal that transcended conventional understanding of life and death. The black alpha wolf paused on the ridgeline, looking back at Diana with ancient eyes that held both wildness and wisdom. Through their connection, she felt its message with perfect clarity. The circle continues, the guardians adapt, the forest endures. Diana nodded, accepting both the responsibility and the gift this unexpected path had offered. Science had brought her to this forest, but something far older would guide her journey forward, a calling that harmonized rational understanding with mystical connection, bridging worlds too long divided. Together, human and wolf, scientist and guardian, they continued into the ancient forest that now felt eternally like home.